You're on, Daniel.
All right, welcome. It's 5:06 p.m. And we are going to begin this Glendale Historic Preservation Commission hearing at this time in May. Meetings are broadcast live on Glendale TV, viewable on Spectrum Cable, Channel 6, and AT&T UVerse, Channel 99. Meetings are also streamed live in high definition on the city webpage and on YouTube/MyGlendale. And on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire, iOS, and Android devices using a free app called Cablecast and choosing Glendale TV from the menu. Meetings are also archived on the city website for viewing anytime at glendaleca.gov/agendas, period. Call 818-548-4013 for program schedules. For public comments and questions during the meeting, call 818-937-8100. Public comments on a specific agenda item will be taken when that agenda item is discussed. If you have any question about matters on the agenda or requests for assistance, please contact the city clerk at 818-548-2090 during regular business hours. For those of us in here, we're going to turn off our cell phones, me included right now. I'm going to put it in airplane mode after I, pardon me, shut this Joni Mitchell song off that I was listening to. She keeps coming up. Yeah, what? It was Carrie off the Blue album on the way in. Just nice song,
We're looking for
huh?
a theme song, so
What's that?
we want an HPC theme song.
Right.
That's probably
That's
not
right.
going to be it, but
Perfect. It's in the running. Joni Mitchell's a good choice, right? So
Big
maybe
Yellow Taxi would be
Big
great.
Yellow Taxi, of course, yeah.
pave Paradise and
Yeah.
put up a parking lot.
That.
So there's a few options. All right. I guess we'll do roll call.
Yes. Commissioner Bertanian? Here. Commissioner Cusack?
Here.
Commissioner Durham?
Here.
Commissioner Head?
Here.
And Chair Paul?
Here. Okay.
All present.
Great, we're all here. Item 2, reports regarding posting of agenda. The agenda for the May 15th, 2025 regular meeting of the Glendale Historic Preservation Commission was posted on May 12th, 2025 on the bulletin board outside City Hall, just so everybody knows. So I'm going to move one item up for oral communications, but before we get to that, we're going to elect a vice chair. All right? So do I have a motion to nominate a vice chair?
I'd like to nominate Jeffrey Head as vice chair. He's the, I think, second. 3 of us are new, and so I think would be good to have a vice chair that has experience on the commission.
Do I have a second?
I have a second.
Okay. Great. Ready for vote?
All right. Commissioner Cusack?
Aye.
Commissioner, let's see how this works. Doesn't really matter. Commissioner Bertanian?
Aye.
Commissioner Durham?
Yes.
Commissioner Head?
Yes.
And Chair Paul.
Yes.
Vice Chair Head, I should have said, but it wasn't decided yet, so.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners.
Okay, great. All right, good. So I'm going to move oral communications up to agenda item 4, which we are at now. And we have one speaker card, and that speaker is Nicholas Doom. Mr. Doom, would you please step forward?
Chair Paul, members of the commission. My name is Nick Doom. I live in 3734 El Camino in Glendale, and I speak to you as a former member of this commission, 2-term member, and I wish to congratulate all of you, especially the new members, on your appointment, and let you know that you serve on the best commission in the city. You have the most fun job. You go visit old places, historic places, and people's homes, and tour parts of the city that no one, I think, has ever seen before, at least parts I hadn't seen. And I hope you look up, when I was given this big, thick book by Jay of all the pictures and all the regulations, which you now can see on the internet. And I know Jay had a great publication and updated all our historic places. And if you haven't looked, please go and check it out and see all the visual pictures of where in a city are all these historical places and what makes them significant. And bone up on those rules and regulations and codes. And you too, I look forward to great discussions about paving tiles and windowsills and all kind of exterior features, which really do determine the historical outlook of a property. And I know I had a lot to learn, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I hope you all enjoy your tenure on this council as well, and know that you were on the shoulders of when I arrived as a new person and sat on the far end and looked at all these more experienced people, because I was the only new person in quite a while, and look back and now I see 3 new fresh faces, and Jeffrey for a year, and Daniel, now you're in charge. I think that's great. And I know, Ellen, you were on this side, now you're on that side. I wish you well over there too. And in the following footsteps of Commissioner Yurka, who was on this side and now on that side. And I hope to come and visit you in the future and look forward to all your great decisions regarding preserving the history of our fair city. Thank you and good luck.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Doom. May I make a couple of comments about Mr. Doom? Well, Nick, I just want to let you know that it was fantastic working with you and learning from you. And you were always so gracious on this commission. You have such a fantastic personality and attitude. I loved having all your students here for extra credit all the time. And that just shows the generosity of spirit that you have. The fact that your students are coming here at 10:30 at night. Maybe they were just doing really poorly in the class and they really needed the extra credit. Maybe you're just a really hard teacher. But you really made it, you made it a lot easier for me to sit next to you on this commission. And I thank you for everything that you shared. Thank you so much. Any other comments?
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple of comments. Nick, what I appreciated from you on the commission was your students, inviting your students to this meeting. And I think what was so great about it was that you were exposing students to city government and really through preservation, which I think is a great entry. And I think it got some of your students interested. So I think that's really wonderful. And I also appreciate when you made community announcements and events, public events, and I think that was also very helpful for the community, and I appreciate that.
Great. Commissioner Durham?
I just wanted to thank Nick Doom for his years of service on this commission. He did a wonderful job. His contributions are greatly appreciated, and it's a privilege to be following in his footsteps. Thank you.
Okay.
Good luck. One meeting, but you're good.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And so I believe this closes oral communication.
Staff has a voice here.
Okay, staff.
Because staff very much appreciated having Nick on the commission. And you say it's a fun commission, and you brought a lot of that fun. You had really interesting insights, and you had a way of communicating with the applicants and the people in the audience that was very humane and also approachable and friendly and fun. And for all the time you spent with us, it's been a real pleasure. A general comment for the city is it's unfortunate that we've lost so many recent commissioners without the ability to send them off properly with a final hearing that they know is their final hearing, where we can do this sort of thing kind of less ad hoc and as part of the formal proceedings. But thanks for coming tonight so we can say this. And hopefully, there's been a lot of upheaval with how this process works. Hopefully it's going to smooth out in the future and we won't have some of these problems. But don't let that bring you down. So. Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to add one more thing that just came to me. So we had a couple of meetings, I think it was last year, where they were 5 hours long. And even in the later hours of those meetings, and even if we had a contentious issue, your attitude was so good and positive, and even good with the people who were in opposition to some of the things we were saying. If there was a likelihood that we were not going to vote in a way that they wanted, you had a way of still looking them in the eye and communicating with them and saying, just so you know, this is why we're going to do this, or this may not be how we feel. But you were always so gracious in reaching out to go. You went like a little extra mile there, where a lot of people wouldn't think to do that at all. And I remember that. I always thought that was so gracious after 4.5 hours with somebody there where in all likelihood it wasn't going to go their way, and you sensed that, and you would always acknowledge seeing their side. And he would always acknowledge this sense of well, this is just part of the process, and we don't always agree, and you were always really good at communicating that, and I hope that's something that I can take forward too. Hopefully I'll start soon. I don't know if I've done it yet, but it was a great attitude on your part.
No, I just like to add, we unfortunately didn't get to work too long with each other, but it was an absolute pleasure to work with you on the commission, and learning from you was wonderful, and you just always had the best attitude and the energy, very positive, and it's been a pleasure. I definitely learned a lot from you as well being here, so thank you so much for your service.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. So that closes oral communications, what got moved to agenda item number 4. Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you. Okay. So now we move to the new agenda item for approval. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. The new agenda item 5, sorry. It's going to be approval of minutes, approval of Historic Preservation Commission minutes from October 17th and March 20, October 17th, 2024, and March 20 of 2025. Do I have approval of the minutes?
Yes.
Great, wonderful, and I'm glad it was Commissioner Head, because you were the only other person here besides me. So,
And that's how it works. We just need whoever was present to acknowledge that the minutes are accurate,
Okay.
to the best of your knowledge. One thing I do recommend, I think it's easy to kind of skip over these a little bit, but we have had many commissioners over the years identify mistakes that we have made in the minutes. We got the vote wrong, we got a name wrong. We really appreciate if you take a little bit of time, to the best of your memory, to kind of let us know if we've got it.
Okay.
The other thing that's interesting that we don't see all the time, but if you look, or when you look at these, if you look at the March minutes from our last meeting, we had 2 design review cases. So in addition to the minutes, we include the record of decision, which is basically the memorialization of what the commission did in terms of the design review case that was heard. And that becomes a legal document when it's accepted as part of the approval of the minutes. So you'll see that every so often.
Okay, just looking through the March minutes right now, if we have any, what's the word? Sometimes it will, conditions, are the conditions supposed to be in the minutes, or are they not in the minutes?
No, they're on the record. For a design review, they're in the record of decision. For Mills Act, they're not, so.
Okay, got it. So, yeah, all right, very good. Good to know. Thank you. Okay, so minutes are approved from October 17th, 2024, and March 20th, 2025. So now we are going to jump to agenda item 6, board and commission member comments or staff comments. I definitely have a couple. I would like to just take a minute to, I want to go around the room, and I would like the new commissioners to tell me a little bit about yourself, say your name, and I would like, just so anybody watching we can learn a little bit more about us, since there's so many new commissioners.
I did it last time.
Do it again. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm Kevin Bartanian, legal name Kevork Bartanian. I'm a longtime Glendale resident. I've kind of grown up here in the city. I'm married, I have 2 kids, we live in Glendale. I was appointed to this position to kind of give back to the community and kind of preserve the historic nature of some of our properties in the city of Glendale.
And you told me earlier you have a media company?
I do, yeah. It's called Cavani.
Okay.
We specialize in outdoor advertising.
Okay.
Iconic kind of inventory in LA, all over LA.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Lisa Cusack, and I moved to Glendale 4 years ago, and partially because it's such a beautiful city, and I really love the city. And so I got interested in the historical preservation process when my own neighborhood, Cleveland Knolls, was up for a historical district, which I know here I will recuse myself, but that is what really interested me in the process. And I do really love preserving old things. And I'm married with 3 kids. And yeah, really excited to be here.
Wonderful. How old are your kids?
Let's see, they just 12, 10, and about to be 6.
Wow. Okay. Great. Wonderful.
I'm Alan Durham, a 30-year resident of Glendale, live in the northwest portion of Glendale. As Daniel and Jeffrey and Jay and Ani, I think already know, I'm not a stranger to this commission. I've been watching meetings of this commission for the last 3 years. I've attended a lot of the meetings recently in person and spoken on various preservation issues. So it's a privilege to be part of the commission at this point. And I'd like to thank Artie Kasakian and Vartan Karpetian for nominating me to the commission.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay.
Let's see, I'm Jeffrey Head. I've been on the commission for just over a year, maybe a year and a half. I also am a longtime resident of Glendale. I am a writer. I write mostly about architecture and design.
Wonderful. And just so you know a little bit about me, I'm Daniel Paul, and I'm a federally qualified architectural historian. I've been dealing with historic preservation work of one kind or another, starting off as a volunteer and then having my own small practice now for the past 30 years, so most of my life. And I was at an environmental consulting firm for 15 years. I've lived in Glendale for 8 or 9 years now. I live in the La Crescenta part, like the upstate part, and I was appointed on this commission a while ago by Brotman and Councilmember Brotman, and then reappointed by Councilmember Brotman, and I don't remember the second person. Sorry. And it's been really enjoyable, and I hope that you all enjoy it too as much as we have. It's been, I think, as Nick mentioned, it's been quite. There's a lot of good moments here, so welcome. Okay, do I have any other commissioner comments? Anything anybody else would like to say? Staff?
No, and we don't have any callers so far.
Okay. All right, no callers so far. Okay, so we are going to close agenda item 7. Is there any old business?
No.
Nothing. Okay. Very good. Okay, now we are going to move to new business, and I think most of today's is basically going to be like a training session. It's my understanding of a couple of things. And so we are at what's now agenda item 9, item A, commission training regarding the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. So I'm going to turn it over to staff at this time.
The first part of your training comes from Shanaz, our wonderful colleague who's helping with the phones tonight, and who knows if we get any action. But she reminds me to remind you to be very careful with the microphone. You need to speak into the microphone, and she didn't say who, but someone there was a little trouble hearing. If it's really bad, we get a call from GTV6, and they tell us, and we may have to backtrack and start over. So just keep in mind, Most people like to keep their mic on mute unless you're talking, but then if you forget to put it on again, so use your judgment. But that's our first training. Our bigger and more important trainings are, I'm going to take the first part, and Ani's going to take the second part. We want to take this opportunity, since so many of you are brand new here, you have some familiarity with some of the concepts, I'm sure, but we wanted to look at the two primary sets of guidelines that kind of govern the design review that you will be performing as applicants come to us, not for Glendale Register work so much, to get nominated to the Register or the Mills Act, but specifically when someone comes to us and they need to change an aspect of their property, they want to put an addition, they want to put a second story on, they want to tear the house down and build a new house. So the idea of these guidelines goes back to the 19th century, actually, and even before that, in terms of the kind of developing a philosophy of how we look at the built environment and how we kind of try to make consistent, not quite objective, but fairly predictable changes in what you approve or what you might not be able to approve. That said, there's room for debate, there's room for disagreement. We're not all necessarily going to agree on every issue, whether it's a big picture issue or a focused issue. But that's the point of this. We hash it out, you guys deliberate, we take a vote, and whoever gets the majority of that vote, whatever issue or concept, is going to take the day, and that's what's going to get approved or disapproved by the commission. So a lot of this is based in the Glendale Municipal Code, which basically says that for Glendale Register properties, with or without a Mills Act, the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation are the guiding principles that you use and staff uses to develop kind of a sense of what's an appropriate change or intervention on a property and what might not be appropriate. For a historic district property, we use a different set of guidelines that are based on the Secretary of the Interior standards, and those are the Glendale Historic District Design Guidelines. As you'll see in a minute, the federal standards established by the federal government, that's why we call it the Secretary of the Interior. All federal preservation activities are done at the Department of the Interior level, and then they trickle down to the state, and then they come down to the actual cities that do more of the actual implementation of these guidelines. And it's important to remember that these are philosophical principles. They're here to help you kind of place things in context. They're not rules. Even the Historic District Design Guidelines, which are much more specific than the federal standards, are not rules, they're guidelines. They're written with a should instead of a shall, which gets confusing for members of the community sometimes. Well, if it says should, it doesn't say I have to do this or not do this, so you'll hear people, saying that they should be able to do something that you may or may not agree with. So these are two, especially the standards, are kind of complicated to get your head around, and you'll learn over time. So I'm going to give you a quick introduction into the standards. Like I said, Ani will do the district guidelines, but you're going to learn by doing. You're going to learn by being a member of the commission. You're going to pick stuff up over time, and we're always available. If there's an item that's on the agenda, you can always call staff if you have questions, whether it's a specific question or a bigger picture, what's our jurisdiction, why would we look at it this way instead of that way. For every design review project that comes to the commission, we write a staff report. And sometimes it's one of us, in some situations it's one of our colleagues in the planning division working with us to assess the project, go over the drawings in great detail, usually visit the site, work with the applicant, work with the architect, and we try to condense all of that into a staff report where ultimately we're going to make recommendations of how we think the commission should vote based on the our interpretation of the guidelines and the situation. Of course, that's a recommendation. You're not bound by what staff says. The commission often disagrees with us. Sometimes we're right on, sometimes not. And within your group, you're going to agree and disagree sometimes. So these are important, just kind of background things to keep in mind. I have a bunch of slides. I'm going to try to go through them fairly quickly. I think asking questions during that, since we don't have a big audience, is probably the best way, rather than waiting until the end so we can stay focused and have the slides up. So what I'm going to do is first talk about the broader picture that's established by the Secretary of the Interior. We have 4 sets of standards. So the rehabilitation standards that you are mandated to use by the city code are only one of those 4. So we have standards for preservation, standards for rehabilitation, standards for restoration, and standards for reconstruction. Yes.
One quick question, just for something you said. You just said that for the standards that we are mandated to use by city code, is that just for Glendale Register properties?
Glendale Register and properties identified as eligible for the register.
The register, but not district?
The district gets a little more, the historic district guidelines are completely based on the standards. They were written kind of following the standards. We added language into the code that the Secretary of the Interior's rehabilitation standards also apply to district properties. In reality, we stay much more focused on the guidelines because they're so much more specific. So,
Okay.
but they are in there, so.
The guidelines are obviously based off the standards of rehabilitation.
That was, yes, they were written by Architectural Resources Group. They won an award from the LA Conservancy. They could use some updating, so we'll get around to that, but they're pretty good. And yeah, so that's,
Thank you.
That's where that goes. So, and it's funny that we have a standard called preservation when we're thinking that's what we do. This is the Historic Preservation Commission, so I'll try to explain that a little bit. I won't go over this too much because it's a little arcane, but I just want you to get the context of how things are placed. These are kind of listed in order of least amount of intervention, least amount of work, into the most amount of work. So preservation, as defined by the Park Service, is the act or process of applying measures necessary to sustain the existing form, integrity, and materials of a historic property. We are not making additions. We are not restoring. We're not bringing it back. We're letting something stay in its current condition. And there are a variety of reasons to do that. These 2 examples, most of the examples I'm going to give you are Glendale, but to broaden it, I'm showing a few others. You know, this is Casa Grande National Monument in Arizona. They built in the 1930s this crazy umbrella roof structure over this pre-ancient Native American building. You can see that if they hadn't built that, in the foreground of the picture is another building that has just melted into the desert. So the idea is to try to keep things as alive for as long as possible, in many cases until you know what you're going to do with it. So the building on the right is what we call mothballed. It didn't have a use, it didn't have a user, but you don't want people moving in. You don't want bugs and animals getting in. You don't want fires to start. You want the building to be able to breathe, but not be accessible. So you start doing things like putting grates and screens and covers over windows and sealing it up, and then you see what happens. So that's preservation. We have a modest example of that going on in Glendale right now. This is the Rockhaven Sanitarium in North Glendale. Lots of controversy. Did the city do the right thing? Did we do it in a timely way? Let's not get there. We did, a couple of years ago, put these heavy-duty tarps on the roofs. We were having major roof leak issues, and so we put these tarps on because A, we didn't have the money, and we don't know how most of these buildings are going to be used. So we wanted to stabilize it, prevent water from continuing to get in, but let it kind of otherwise sit there. You can see a few boarded up windows. We're still in the process of doing some of the stabilization work. So that's a local example. We don't have many that I've experienced in my time here. Rehabilitation, we're going to focus on a lot, but I just want to define it. The act or process of making possible a compatible use for a property through repair, alterations, and additions, while preserving those portions or features which convey its historic, cultural, or architectural values. The idea here is that we recognize that to keep a building alive, it sometimes needs to change. And one of the base underlying things that historic preservation does is manage change. We don't pretend that things don't change. We know they're going to. We want them to. We just want to make sure that that change occurs in a way that's respectful of these historic, cultural, and architectural values. The classic example of rehabilitation that you see all around the country is old office buildings in downtown areas where the office uses have just disappeared. The use is dead. What are we going to do with this? Well, converting it to residential is a very easy, not easy, but it's one of the most obvious ways to deal with a building that has a lot of windows, a big floor plate, often very well built back in the day. So this is an example in downtown LA, but here we are at Rock Haven, where we have one building that we're working on a project to rehabilitate as a museum about Rock Haven based on a state grant that we got. So we have the Pines Cottage that you see up at the left, which is a beautiful Spanish colonial building, got a lot of nice details. It's been sitting vacant for too long now. The exterior is going to be brought back to how it looked before. It's going to be stripped away of some of the conduits and things on it. But there will be some changes at the interior, which is part of the rehabilitation, because this used to be a hospital building for women with mental health issues. So this was a sanitarium designed for women, run by women. The founder of it is an important figure in American medical history, especially local medical history. And so we want to make sure that that aspect is still there, that people can still appreciate why this building existed. But to create a museum in it, there will be some changes. So we see different areas. We'll have yellow rooms that are kind of period rooms to look like it did when the women were residing there. One of these orange areas, the one kind of, let's see if I can do this. This orange area is actually going to become a yellow area. This is an older diagram. I couldn't find the updated one. The orange areas are going to be more museum areas. So they're not necessarily going to have every feature. For example, there's a wall that runs across here. But as a museum, they may want to have lectures or spaces where there are larger gatherings. So we thought, okay, we'll remove that wall, but we're leaving a lot of the other areas. And that's why rehabilitation is the standard we usually use, because it's the one that allows the most change for modern uses. Here is one of our most exciting projects. This is the Harrower Lab, just down on Broadway, a couple blocks east from us. This was a medical establishment for an early endocrinologist / quack who did interesting things with animal glands and all kinds of stuff. So there was a series of 3 buildings that were built for Mr. Harrower, so it's called the Harrower Laboratory. It was sold to the city, and we are trying to use city funds for affordable housing projects. So this is being converted into an affordable senior housing project. It received a federal rehabilitation tax credit, which we won't get into, but just know that when you get the tax credit, and this is the first tax credit project in the city, you're at the highest standards of review under the rehabilitation standards. So parts of this project have been brought to the commission in the past, and it's ready for its grand opening, I believe. So a lot of the exterior work was just keeping what's there, fixing it up. But you can see in the top picture the 3 red brick buildings. In the back, there's a lighter colored brick building. To increase the financial feasibility of the site, it was approved to put a new building on the site to kind of close off the courtyard at the south end that you see at the top there. And that's the kind of intervention that the rehabilitation standards can accept. Other standards wouldn't. So the idea of finding a way to make projects feasible, which includes financial feasibility in some cases, can factor into the thinking of how we use the rehabilitation standards. Restoration is kind of a different animal. It focuses on a period of time, a building that's changed over the years, and the idea is that we're going to bring it back to a specific time in its history. So technically, officially, it's the act or process of accurately depicting the form, features, and character of a property as it appeared at a particular period of time by means of the removal of features from other periods in its history and reconstruction of missing features from the restoration period. So we haven't had a ton of experience with this standard in Glendale. This example is the Boyle Hotel from Boyle Heights. It's pretty obvious that they restored the cupola on the turret on the corner. They restored the kind of crest at the parapet above the center wall that you can see there. They brought back some of the cast iron columns at the ground floor at the storefronts. And this was a decision that was made because A, the building wasn't in great shape, and it was really well loved. And it was the place where mariachi players lived. And so the city of Los Angeles got funding to kind of restore this back to what it looked like in the 1880s. Our best restoration example in Glendale is the interiors of the Brand Library, which we did several years ago. So I put this series of pictures. The Brand Library was, of course, originally El Miradero. Leslie and Mary, yes, but what's her middle? Mary Louise Brand, sorry, Mary Louise. So this was a family home. Then it was donated after Brand and Mary Louise were dead. It was donated to the city for use as a library and a park, so that's why we have Brand Park. You can see in the lower two photos, the library kind of did things to it. It was not completely respectful of the historic design. And in the restoration, the city made an effort to bring back the domestic feel of the interiors, some of the interior spaces. So it's a mixture of semi-restored spaces and newer spaces. One of the best things that happened was the restoration of some of the ceiling murals, so the painted ceilings, which were not salvageable for a variety of reasons. You can see the bottom small photo shows this is what it looked like when we took off the popcorn and the kind of other ceiling materials that have been added, got rid of the fluorescent lights, brought back more period fixtures. This isn't a perfect restoration, and it was done on a budget, so it's not, you know, it's great, I think, for what the city was able to do. And hopefully, if you haven't been there, you can pop in. It's really worth seeing. The final treatment is reconstruction. We don't really recommend this in general. This is the idea of a building that's been demolished at some point, maybe 200 years ago, maybe 80 years ago. For whatever reason, people want to rebuild that building. It has some kind of major significance. So reconstruction officially is the act or process of depicting by means of new construction the form, features, and detailing of a non-surviving site, landscape, building, structure, or object for the purpose of replicating its appearance at a specific period of time and in its historic location. There's not a lot to say about this in Glendale. The Capitol building and several other buildings at Williamsburg and Virginia are famous examples of reconstructions that were based on pretty good research, scientific evidence, archaeological evidence, documentary evidence, and they did their best to bring this back to what they believe this building looked like. Is it accurate? I don't know. It's close, but who knows? I use in my head an example: if lightning struck the tower at the Alex Theater and it collapsed and was destroyed, I would support very strongly that we rebuild that tower as it was. So that could be the way reconstruction might find its way. Hopefully it doesn't, but that could be why reconstruction is something we'd even consider. So now we're going to jump to the standards. So does that all make more or less sense? Okay, interrupt me at any time. The rehabilitation standards, each of the 4 treatments has a different set of standards, but there's a lot of similarity between them. There's a lot of overlap. Ultimately, we're trying to keep as much historic material as possible. That's kind of one of the underlying goals. But there are 10 basic principles. The goal is to preserve the distinctive character of a building and its site while allowing reasonable changes to meet new needs. So standard 1, I'm starting out these slides with the subtitle. The title here is my shorthand interpretation of the wonky, long-winded thing the Park Service says. The idea is if you've got a building and you're dealing with something at it, And these only get invoked when there's a project on a building. It's not something we're just looking at a building and saying, oh, we should invoke standard 3 and standard 7. It's when someone wants to do something, that's when we have to interpret their proposed work under the standards. So you want to keep the use whenever possible, but often you can't, so we find a compatible new use. This is I'm not going to read the wonky things. I think that's a little too much. But the idea is we're trying to minimally change the distinctive features of the property while allowing this new use. So going back to that first slide, we have a building in downtown Los Angeles where the Pacific Electric Red Car used to be headquartered, and there was a car barn. You can see the train coming out of the bottom of the building. This was an office building primarily, but it also had industrial uses for the trains on the lower levels, and it was restored and turned into condominiums. Award-winning project, met all of the standards. I think this was a tax credit project. So this is the obvious kind of situation. Sometimes there are less obvious ones. The Alex Theater, for example, was built as a vaudeville movie theater. They still show movies there, but they also have live performances. They also have conferences. They also do other things there. Movie theaters in general are really easier to reuse than some others because you can turn it into a church, you can turn it into some kind of meeting hall. So that's an example of kind of a no-brainer in terms of finding a compatible use. The Masonic Temple, on the other hand, was a really complicated project where the upper floors were vacant for decades because no one could figure out what to do with these strange, large ceremonial spaces that the Masons had in the building. And those spaces account for the weird window pattern that you see on the side in this picture. So the idea was, for many years, let's turn this into an office building. Well, if it's an office building, we need more windows. We need something different. So after review by the commission, city council looked at this. It was a big deal. Not everyone agreed that this project was a great solution for this building, even on the commission. But what happened was we ended up restoring the front facade. There were some features that were missing, so we brought those back. All of the original windows were left on the front, all of the original material. It's made out of board form concrete, so you see those lines across the front in the uplighting. The owner of the building, Mr. Caruso, proposed to smooth out those lines and kind of make a nice flat facade, and we were like, no. We have to keep that. But we did approve these large windows that you see on both sides, and we approved the stair tower that you see on the south side, which I was adamantly opposed to because I thought that could have been put on the inside also. But, this is the kind of compromise. This world of preservation is very much an interactive, iterative, not compromised, but worked out through compromise kind of business that we do. Yeah.
Just wanted to say on the first point, just as an observation or a thought from past experience, where we get into the nitty-gritty and sometimes, letting property owners know that we may think differently on them is not so much in the use most of the time, but this part where it talks about what constitutes minimal change and then materials, features, spaces, and spatial relationships. Like sometimes it just seems to come down to the details. And sometimes we'll hash out, we could spend 40 minutes or whatever the case is, dealing with some of these smaller details that are listed here, because sometimes a small detail like that, if it's not done right, it could really stand out a lot. So just as an observation and just thinking about, sometimes we'll have somebody come in here and they'll say, well, I need to do this in order to make this work. And sometimes on the commission we'll question that or say, well, a lot of times they're going to have their architect here or whatever, and we'll say, well, maybe if you could still do this if you could adjust this. And in the past, sometimes it seems like it's come down to, well, sometimes some owners are like, this is just what I prefer, but ultimately it's like, well, okay, but under this standard, we need to try to make a good faith effort to try to preserve these materials and features and spaces, provided you can still accomplish your new use.
Yeah, thank you, great.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, one thing I should have mentioned that I forgot was thinking about spaces in particular. Almost all projects we look at, we're only looking at the exteriors of the properties. The only time at the city level that we're looking at interiors are for publicly accessible buildings or city-owned buildings. So the Alex Theater, again, is a great example for that. Or if there's a rehabilitation tax credit, like at the Harrower Lab, the interiors were reviewed there also. But in general, we are blind to the interiors, which is unfortunate sometimes because we can lose some beautiful spaces, but that's the way the law is.
Jay, I
Jeffrey?
have a question about the
The slide?
Masonic building. Have you ever seen a project get to a point where it goes beyond rehabilitation? I mean, there's the exterior staircase. If there were two exterior staircases, or if there's a different pattern or another entrance or something that was added to the building, what I'm asking is, it's rehabilitation up to a point, but does it ever kind of go beyond?
Yeah, there can be a tipping point, and that's why we have the public review process. That's why things come to the commission. If they had proposed, maybe a staircase on the other side and said it was impossible to have an interior staircase at all, we would have strongly recommended that the commission not accept that and ask them to try to find another solution. That solution may turn into the compromise of, well, let's get rid of one of them, but have the other one. Because the rehabilitation standards allow large additions to be made, if you have a large building, you can put a large addition on it. It's how you do that. It's in the details. It's how you separate the look, and we'll talk about that when we talk about Standard 9. But, yeah, but there could be something that tips something beyond the point that I'm comfortable with, Ani, you guys, council even. So, yeah, so it's quite possible. And that's part of the negotiation that goes on. Because we do a lot of design review before anything comes to you. So we're doing our staff level stuff, then it comes to you. You may have comments, the applicant may hear your comments and make changes, and city council is not necessarily going to be involved in this. But I think I mentioned, we did some briefings with all of the new commissioners, but for design review, HPC is the binding design review authority. So you're the final stop for most design review cases that have to come to you. But that's only a small fraction of the cases that come to us at staff level. So we do most of the design review work at staff level for historic areas or for regular parts of the city. The things that do come to you are coming for a reason. We're not comfortable with them. We think they don't meet the standards. We have certain thresholds that kind of kick something up to you automatically. We can't do it at staff level. So there's that kind of vetting process that we look at. And sometimes we would try to bring it into conformance with the standards. If we can't, we will let you know in our staff report, we don't think this meets the standards. The commission, and this is kind of a fine point of code, the commission is allowed to step beyond the standards if the commission, as a final vote, as the majority of the commission, feels there's a reason to do so. So we haven't really had that come up much, but it's built in as a relief valve for unanticipated situations where you might say, yeah, they're doing really good work everywhere else, but I kind of get why they need to do this thing that doesn't quite meet the standards, but the rest of the project does, and you weigh the pros and cons, and so you're not bound by the standards, but like I said, that's not a common thing coming up.
Yeah. Will this commission have, if it ever comes up, have the opportunity to consider the Sears building?
It's a possibility, which we can't really talk about. Not for any secret reason,
Yeah.
because for the very reason that it may come before the commission.
Got it.
It's not agendized. Anything that we talk about needs to be agendized, so.
And Jay, when you say, just as a point of clarification with what you were just speaking with Commissioner Head about, when you say go beyond the standards, do you mean like that we could request something that would meet the standards and surpass what the standards is requiring? Or do you mean the other way around?
I think that we would all celebrate.
Yeah, right.
But, and I don't even know what surpass the standards would be, because
don't
it
know
meets the
either.
standards.
But
But
I'm just
it
wondering-
it would be a situation where
Something
an
doesn't meet the
aspect of the
standard.
project you weren't comfortable with. You didn't think it met standard 9 as well as it could, but it was not super publicly visible. It wasn't going to have it. There are no rules, and I can't say what that would be.
Right.
But it was built into the code specifically as kind of a relief valve. Staff, in our review, are bound by the standards. And there's an exception we can talk about when we talk about historic districts, but by code, we can't approve things that don't meet the standards. You should be approving things because they meet the standards, but like I said, you have that relief valve.
Thank you. Okay.
All right.
Commissioner Durham?
Jay, when you mentioned binding design review, how binding is that? Or, because I've seen things get appealed to city council decisions of this commission.
Yeah, so that's, binding is, you have the same oversight as DRB. Your decision is final. If the applicant isn't happy with your decision, they can appeal it to council. If members of the community aren't happy with your decision, they can appeal it to the council. We've had rare situations where 2 appeals are filed from each direction. But yes, so council can get involved through an appeal process. But you're still, for the vast majority of the cases you hear, you're the final stop in that decision-making. Okay. Standard 2, and this is pretty basic to preservation, keep historic character and distinctive features. I couldn't come up with a really great example to share, so I just am using the Breed Street Shul in Boyle Heights, since we already looked at Boyle Heights. This was a Jewish synagogue from the era when Boyle Heights was not just a Jewish neighborhood, it was a really integrated neighborhood with Japanese, Mexicans, Russians. It was kind of a really interesting mix. It's largely a Latino neighborhood now, and the Breed Street Shoal is a designated landmark in Los Angeles. So there's the idea that you want to keep the historic character of this site. It's not going to be used as a temple again. It has religious iconography on it, but those are distinctive materials or distinctive features. So the Standard 2 tells us not to remove or alter those features, spaces, and spatial relationships that characterize a property. It says will be avoided. Doesn't mean you can't sometimes do it. There might be a time when we approved when the Self-Realization Fellowship, Self-Realization took over in Chevy Chase Canyon, or in Glen Oaks Canyon, the church that had been there, and it had a great stained glass mural spanning the whole wall facing north, and Jesus was a large part of that stained glass. Self-Realization looks at all spiritual leaders and teachers as equally important to the world, and so they didn't want to have this focus on Jesus. This is not a historic building. I'm using this as an example. It is actually, but it isn't designated. We weren't treating it that way. But I use that as an example where we let them change the stained glass there to keep the design, keep the concept of it, but not kind of violate their principles. When I was in New York, I worked on a conversion of a church that was being turned into a condo through a large addition and then the church building. The frieze, the area above the entry to the church, had engraved in the limestone, "Love thy neighbor." What a brilliant message for a condominium project. They wanted to remove that. And we, at the Landmarks Commission, were like, no, it didn't violate any kind of, it didn't promote any single religion. It was just a nice thought. So that was pretty funny.
a quick question on this point. Do we have it at our discretion as the Historic Preservation Commission to define what important character defining features are if they're not defined somewhere else?
Yeah, well, generally, if we're dealing with a Glendale Register property, we have a historic report that should define them. Some of our older reports aren't as well detailed as our more recent reports. The code allows staff to, in the absence of a formal list of features, to identify features. And we also, even the best surveyor surveying a building isn't going to hit every single feature, or they're going to just not see something. So we want to just make sure that we do it, but we have to do it in kind of a scholarly way. We can't just say, well, I think that's a feature, and then someone's bound to that. So we have to justify any decision that we make that hasn't previously been identified. So we're going to do that at staff level. If you are reviewing the project or looking at the site and feel like something's been missed, by all means, bring it up at the hearing, and your colleagues can discuss it, so.
And this just applies to GR properties, not districts?
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
So here's some of the interior features at the Breed Street Shul, just as an example. Criterion 3 is an interesting one, based on some early issues that came up in the early 20th century as preservation was trying to figure out how to do things. So the idea is, don't create a sense of false history. What we're trying to protect is what we know to have been real, what we know to have been on the ground, in place, during a certain period in history. The idea of, and this is one of the lines I use with people all the time, a lot of people are like, well, what I'm proposing is so much prettier, so much nicer than what you're saying I should do. You're saying I should have a concrete driveway, but I want to have this nice other kind of driveway. And so I'm like, preservation is not pretty necessarily. We like to think it is, but it's a matter, there's definitely room for diverging opinions and views. But this standard is basically saying, if you've got a Second Empire house and you want to build a garage, 110 or 20 years after the house was built, maybe the garage doesn't have to look like the house so much. So we don't want to create this sense of false history. The concept is that the properties are recognized as physical records of their time, their place, their use. Changes that create this sense of false historical development, such as adding conjectural features or elements taken from other properties, will not be undertaken. This doesn't come up too much in our review in Glendale. It's something we should keep as background, but we do have a couple of examples. One, I didn't put pictures, but when you're leaving the garage tonight, you'll see the Howard Street substation, which is the beautiful little Art Deco power substation. There are light fixtures on the outside of that were taken from the building that used to be where the Perkins building, where the GWP building is, and they took those light fixtures and they put them on the Howard Street substation. It's long before either of us were here, so you can't blame us. Had I been here, we would have said, no, we really shouldn't do that. Same thing with the Security Trust building on Brand Boulevard, which is a major landmark, first tall building in the city. It itself has been changed a lot over the years, partly because of earthquakes and safety issues. But at some point, someone stuck these light fixtures on the outside that they got from somewhere else. They weren't there before. Is it the worst thing in the world? If you didn't know that they weren't original, you'd walk down the street and say, oh, nice light fixtures. The idea is, this is the kind of thing that we have to kind of step back from and say, even though it's pretty, even though it's nice to find a new home for those lights, maybe this isn't the right place to do it. So, got that one. Standard 4 is when there are changes over time. Sometimes they're minor. Sometimes they're meaningless. But sometimes they're significant. Sometimes there's something we want to think about more. So I use the example of Chartres Cathedral in France with the idea that the two towers were built hundreds of years apart. And there may have been a temptation at some point when they were building the more ornate tower on the left to say, well, why don't we get rid of that old Gothic tower and put another nice flamboyant Gothic so that we have symmetry and balance. And the idea is we say no, because that destroys the continuity, the sense of history here. We say that something like that is a significant change. So anything that's acquired historic significance in its own right will be retained and preserved. So in Los Angeles, there was an interesting situation at Clifton's Cafeteria on Broadway, if you know it. We have the old picture, we have the current, more or less, picture in the center. But sometime in the 50s or early 60s, one of these facade screens was put up over it, which was an attempt to modernize buildings and make them look cleaner, newer, more contemporary, more modern, whatever. And that was a thing that was happening. And so there's room for debate in the preservation world to say, okay, Clifton's comes along and said they want to restore the old facade. Well, was this 50s, 60s facade significant? Is there reason to kind of debate that? With Clifton's, I'm not sure that that was a serious debate, but that's the kind of thinking that we have to do under this standard. We do have an example, this is a theoretical example in Glendale. The left-hand picture is what the Alex Theater used to look like. This is what it was when it was built, and you kind of don't even see the full old theater building at the back. You had this forecourt, kind of like at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood, and then you had some shops in this little building. Someone could come to us, if this weren't city-owned, so theoretical example, and say, well, this 50s, or this 40s, I'm sorry, streamlined modern marquee, it's tacky. Let's bring this back. Let's bring the Alex back to its original appearance. So we have to think, well, is this marquee from S. Charles Lee, one of the most important theater architects in the world? Is this a significant change that was made to the building? Hopefully it's obvious to all of us, yes, it is. But that's the kind of thing we have to think about, so. Okay, this is a lot, right? But we're almost halfway through my part. So, Standard 5, some of these start to feel a little repetitive, where we're keeping significant pieces. Here it's keeping character-defining features. These are aspects of a building that are often dictated by the style of the building, but they can also be dictated by the very specific things that that building has. Architecture is a very quirky place sometimes, and you have buildings that aren't a pure example of Spanish colonial or colonial revival. You may have pieces from different styles or periods even. So the idea is we have all kinds of style guides. We have our historic district guidelines have kind of style guides talking about the styles, where we can identify the key character-defining features, and that's usually done by style. But they can also be materials, features, finishes, and construction techniques, or examples of craftsmanship that characterize a property. So all of those things should be or will be preserved when we're trying to do something. Now, does that mean that every window on a building is an important character-defining feature? Not necessarily. But that's where we're starting to find the balance. We're looking at everything, and we're trying to assess how we can allow change, because the commission, so many people in the community think all we're doing is trying to freeze time and tell them that's it. And we emphasize as much as we can, no, we're trying to help you find a way to get the changes that you want, but do it in a way that's sympathetic to your property and in a historic district to the broader neighborhood. So this one comes in, we use this one a lot when we're looking at reviewing properties.
Jay,
Yeah.
just a point on this. So, where we encourage people to preserve materials, features, finishes, construction techniques, or examples of craftsmanship, if research bears out that there was a certain type of window that was there, and it seems feasible or reasonable to bring that window back on that property, that's not considered conjecture or false history.
If we have proof, either physical evidence or documentary evidence, sure.
Okay. Just because sometimes when we get into character-defining features, a lot of times it seems like we're asking people to bring something back, but that's, if we know what was there from the research, then it's not it wouldn't violate the no false history standard.
No, because that's undocumented. That's stuff
Right.
that never existed.
Got it.
So if we know something existed, and we can bring it back, but if you're reviewing an addition on the back of a house, for example, it's on the Glendale Register, and you see a jalousie window on the side facade that didn't get called out in the Mills Act contract or anything, you have to use your judgment, and we'll recommend we look for a nexus between the work that you're reviewing and any other areas. So we're not telling people who are on the register in a district or identified in a survey that you're obligated to restore your property back to what it was. We only work with them when they come to us wanting to make a change. So
Okay.
that's really important.
And I should know the answer to this, but I don't, considering some of my recent work. But to go back to the Clifton's example, do GR nominations require that a period of significance be defined?
No, we don't necessarily. The period of significance for a GR is usually the construction date. Unless there was a significant person associated with the
The
property.
design criteria?
Yeah, but there could be a period of significance. It's just not, we don't call it out specifically.
Okay, so just, I don't know how familiar you are, you might be with this, but on National Register nominations, it's mandated, and I think California Register nominations too, that a period of significance be defined. So like, when was the property important? If it was, normally if it's important as an example of its design, you just bring it back to the year it was completed or first built. But depending on why it's significant, it could have a larger period of significance. And sometimes that period of significance, you know, whatever features or character defining elements were within that defined period, that helps frame what's a reasonable change or not. But that's why I was asking if GR requires
Yeah,
that.
an example is the Brand Library was built in 1904, 1910 with an addition. There was the Art Center that was built in 1965-ish, I think. And when I started here, there was a question, is the Art Center part of the designation? It wasn't ever officially said by Preservation Commission. Our records from back then are not super great. So I couldn't find anything that said, yes, the Art Center is part of the historic property. I was just like, yes, it is. I think any preservationist would say, yes, that is part of the historic ensemble of buildings, which means the period of significance would go from 1904 to 1965. And I'm putting a note down because we're going to be, we've already created a new nomination form, which Daniel's familiar with our old form not being really the best or even up to date on the website. I think we'll talk internally about putting a period of significance there because it seems like a fine idea. It doesn't come up that often that we have to think about it, or if we do, we know what to do with it. But it doesn't hurt to put it in writing.
Commissioner Durham?
And period of significance comes into play, I think, always in designating historic districts.
Right.
I mean, so that's part and parcel of that process.
Yeah, it's the same concept, but a little bit different. I think Ani's going to cover that a little bit, so, if I ever end. So, I'll speed through this. Here's an example of a house, or two different houses. Character-defining features of Spanish colonial revival. One of the key features is a clay tile roof. This is a house that's a neighbor of mine. They replaced their clay tile with metal, standing seam metal, colored it red. Doesn't kill me. It looks okay, but it does not meet the standard. So just as an example. Standard 6 is we always have a hierarchy of if there's a problem and something's deteriorated, we try to fix it. If we can't fix it, we can replace it. We first try to replace it in kind. If that's prohibitive in some way, we have the flexibility through the rehabilitation standards to replace it with something that is similar in appearance but may not be the same original material. So I'll show you an example of that last part in a second. These are rafter tails at the Gamble House. Very deteriorated a number of years ago, went through a major restoration. They used epoxy materials to recreate the wood profiles. They put metal combs on it to make it look like wood grain and colored it appropriately. And this very much is an example of how the Secretary standards are applied for rehabilitation of a building. In the Gamble House's case, it was almost more of a restoration. So although if it were true restoration, they would have replaced the wood rather than fixing it. And there were reasons not to do that, but that I'm not going to get into. So here's the hierarchy. Deteriorated features will be repaired rather than replaced. When they're so deteriorated that it requires replacement, the new feature will match the old in design, color, texture, and where possible, materials. So they're giving people an out from materials. Replacement of missing features will be substantiated by documentary and physical evidence. So that's standard 6. Here are some examples. Cracked terracotta on the left that needs to be patched. Patched terracotta in the center, deteriorated terracotta on the Eastern Columbia building downtown LA, and then a picture of the restoration professionals fixing the terracotta, recoating it. So in terms of Glendale, we have the Harrower Lab. This is a nice close-up of the fresh, newly rehabilitated building. Did the developer want to save the original windows? No, they did not. Did the city and the federal government, through the rehabilitation tax credit, say, yes, you must retain and restore the old windows? Yes, we did. So the windows were all there. So this is a subtle example, but other things are, even coming down to finishes. We kind of tried to bring this back to its earlier appearance because the windows had been painted a different color, a darker color. So we brought it back. Here are a couple of examples of how original terracotta, which is a baked clay material, but it's structural, so you sometimes have very big units of terracotta. This building on Hollywood Boulevard was damaged in the 94 earthquake? Is that right? No. Oh, this one's 87, you're right, I think. Oh, no, this is 7, no. It doesn't really matter. That's why we're going over time. It was replaced with a material called glass reinforced fiber cement concrete because you can make that look like terracotta. It's much lighter, it's much cheaper, it's much more feasible. Same thing with this cornice, or the, not the cornice, but the kind of parapet on this building in Brooklyn. It's a substitute material, but it meets the Secretary's Rehabilitation Standard 6. Standard 7 is a pretty easy one. A lot of buildings get dirty over the time. Things happen to them. A good steward of that building is going to want to clean it every so often. When you do that, you have to use the gentlest means possible. Treatments that cause damage to historic materials will not be used. And this is something we invoke in Glendale every so often. On the left is a non-Glendale example of just a very easy cleaning process. Limestone, it turns out, is a very easy material to clean. Sometimes you just let water wash over it over an extended time, and it removes a lot of stuff. But a lot of people with brick buildings, especially a brick building that was painted at some point, and they say, oh, I don't like this paint, I want to bring back the brick, so I'm going to hire that sandblasting guy and let loose. It destroys the brick. It ruins the brick. We just had a building on Central Avenue that the owners came to us and wanted to paint it. And we looked at it. I'd known this building for years, and I was like, well, that's a red brick building. No, we're not gonna paint that building.
Didn't they end up painting it?
Well, that's where I'm going.
Okay.
Spoiler.
This is so upsetting. Okay.
So Ani and I went to look at the building, and we saw a horrible sandblasting job was done on this building, to the point that brick becomes very porous once it loses the outer fire skin, it's called, the outer face of the brick, which isn't good. You don't want water soaking into these materials. So once we saw that, with some reluctance, because still red brick is a nice thing, but we were like, yes, you can paint it. And we don't regulate color in Glendale in general, which is something to keep in the back of your heads. There are a couple of exceptions to that. So that's, does that cover where you were going?
Yeah, it does. But just on something you just said, what is we don't regulate color in Glendale, but what then is the interface between if you have you're trying to preserve materials that have a certain color in those materials, can you make an argument that in the effort to preserve certain materials, you cannot use a different color or paint it another color? If you have natural wood, for example, and somebody wants to paint over redwood, that's a materials preservation
We have an
issue.
exception for like Tudor Revival half timbering.
Right.
We would use that for a mid-century wood-clad house, definitely.
Okay.
So, but in general, we don't regulate color. It's nice to tell people in the community that there's at least one thing that we're not going to tell you what to do. So they say, paint your house purple, just deal with your neighbors, not with us. So, Lisa?
I just have a question. If a house is on the Glendale Register, are they required to use original material unless it's unavailable, or is there wiggle room?
It's going to be case by case. So we're going to try to get original material. Most of our Glendale Register properties also get the Mills Act. So over the course of time, people are getting a pretty significant tax reduction for their property taxes. So it's harder for that person to argue, oh, this costs more. But we still sometimes, and when Ani talks about districts, sometimes things will cost more to meet whatever rules that we have at the city level. We can help people avoid that. We can find ways to compromise sometimes. But yeah, in general, we want to, if material's being replaced, we want to try to find the original material. But
I just have a question for you. Do you mean in cases where original material has already been lost? Or do you mean in cases where the material is there and they're being asked to preserve it?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I guess if they have to replace something.
If they have to replace something, but like the original material is there now and they have to replace it in kind, or if it's, we knew that, or are you asking, like, if there was once an original material and research bared out that there was a material from a long time ago and we're asking them to replace it?
Oh. Well, would it be different?
I've got a good example, I think, that probably hits your question. Spanish tile roofs are very prone to breakage and deterioration. And we get requests often to replace the entire roof. Even we've had a few on Glendale Register properties. And in general, we're going to say, well, why don't you work with a roofer who can salvage the existing tiles, get rid of the old ones, and then we find a new material that matches. And luckily, the people who make clay tiles, it's an ancient business, but the modern technology is not that different than the old one. So we can usually find a decent match. We've had some people where, you know, there's just so much breakage that it kind of doesn't even make sense at that point, and we'll just try to get a good new roof up there, because what we're interested in is preserving the texture that the Spanish tile brings. Some roofs have a special, sometimes they lay two tiles on top of each other, sometimes they lift some of the tiles with a little bit of mortar, concrete mortar, to kind of give it a little texture and kind of yield character. So those are the kinds of things when we're doing, allowing new materials, we're going to try to keep the techniques that were on the old one. So is that covered? Is that an example that works for that? Okay. Standard 8, we don't deal with archaeology much, but preservation as a field does. So archaeology and preservation are kind of in the same world for archaeological resources, especially, you know, built resources or human remains, or, you know, that's usually what it would be. So whenever we see if we're digging on a historic site and we turn up something, we have rules in our code. You stop work. An archaeologist is brought on. They evaluate what's going on there. It doesn't really come up in Glendale, but just so you know, there's a new park being built around the Glendale Library, Central Library. And as part of, because there's federal money that was given to the city to help create the park, it means we have to go through a process, Section 106 and NEPA, which you don't need to know about right now. But the city's hiring an archaeologist to kind of do a walkthrough of the area to kind of evaluate any possible archaeological evidence. We're in communication with the Kiz Native American tribe, who are the Gabrielino Indians, and they get involved in this through state law. So it's complicated, but we do pay attention to archaeology. Here's just an example in Los Angeles. When they were building the Gold Line, they uncovered this brick thing. Turned out to be one of the most important things in all of Los Angeles history, because this was the Zanja Madre, which was the water conduit that took water from the LA River and brought it to the Pueblo downtown. So when they found this, I was at the LA Conservancy, and we were like, well, we need to deal with this. So they built this retaining wall around it. They kept that part exposed. They left the rest of it underground. They didn't excavate in that linear line that you could kind of develop. And so that's how we get involved with archaeology.
I have a quick question for you on this. Does historic archaeology ever come up? Has that come up in Glendale at all, where maybe you have a landscape feature, something that's not ancient, but maybe like 120 years old, and it's preserved as part of a GR property? Has that ever come up here?
Not on a GR property. There's one property that has remains of the old Brockmont Park, the actual private park that was part of that development. We haven't had any projects come up there, but it's always in the back of our head to make sure that if a project comes up, we keep our eyes open for that. Some of it's probably above ground. After the station fire, we hired an archaeologist because there was so much brush lost in the station fire up in the canyon behind Brand Library that we were looking for whatever was there. What we mainly found were wire, what are they, not weirs, there's a name for it, things that were used to control erosion, because it was kind of, they had grape orchards, grapevines in that area. And we didn't find too much that was of great interest, but the city's aware that we do have to look at these things. Okay, number nine, if you're a Beatles fan, number 9. New work is differentiated but compatible. This is the most important, not the most important. Let's say several of these are equally important. They're all important. But this is the one that's the hardest for you and for me and for everyone to kind of find the solution. If you're making a change to a historic property, you're putting an addition, you're building a new building in a historic neighborhood, you're changing part of just a single property, you need to differentiate that work so it doesn't look old, so it doesn't create a sense of false history, but it needs to fit in. So it needs to be differentiated, yet it needs to be compatible. There's so many ways to do this, and it's a difficult thing to evaluate. In some ways, it's you know it when you see it kind of thing, but we guide property owners and architects through the process of trying to figure out what the right solution is. By the time it gets to you, we'll have either said they hit it, did a good job, or we don't think they quite got there. So you'll see case by case as it goes along. I will read this long one because it's so important. New additions, exterior alterations, or related new construction will not destroy historic materials, features, and spatial relationships that characterize the property. The new work will be differentiated from the old and will be compatible with the historic materials, features, size, scale, and proportion, and massing to protect integrity of the property and its environment. So this is actually the most fun of the standards to kind of try to implement, and it's the one where you can get really creative. So here's an example on the left from Philadelphia, on the right from New York City. New buildings in historic neighborhoods. Controversy, yes. Did everyone agree, on the left in particular, that that was an appropriate solution to the kind of row house neighborhood of Philadelphia? Not everyone agreed to that, but in a city that has a strong preservation community, ultimately that was approved in this historic neighborhood in Philadelphia. Personally, I think it's kind of a cool solution, and it invokes Philadelphia history in a really interesting way. The one on the right was a townhouse in Greenwich Village that was destroyed by the Weather Underground terrorist group in the early 70s, was building bombs in the house. It was the rich kids' parents' house. And parents were on vacation, says, hey, come on, let's make a bomb. And I think one person died at least, blew the facade off the house. A really interesting preservation architect in New York whose firm designed the addition to the Central Library downtown, although he wasn't as involved, but he made this choice to kind of both recall the row house, compatible with the neighborhood, differentiate it by pulling the angle, a 30-degree angle of the box out, which in a way helps commemorate what happened at the property. So I think this is brilliant. This is my very, very, very favorite example of a property going really creative and meeting Standard 9 really well. So that's a great example. We have a couple in Glendale, probably not of that caliber, but interesting, and thought went into it by the architects. In both cases, Gruen Architects worked on the new entrance to the Brand Library on the left. The idea is that it's compatible in scale, it's modest in its effort, it has flat surfaces like both the art gallery or the art, what's it called, the art center on the left and the old Brand House on the right. And it does the trick of relocating the entrance to a building to make the old Brand Library much more functional than it was, and to preserve the original front door in the building that was the front door of the library that was getting a lot of abuse over the years. And so the decision was made to close off that entry. At the Central Library over on Harvard, the city made a decision based on the success of the Americana, the rebirth of Brand Boulevard, the presence of the Museum of Neon Art, to kind of create a pedestrian axis from Brand Boulevard and downtown towards Central Park and the library, and now the Armenian American Museum. And so this building only had one entrance on its east side, but the people would be coming more from the west. The parking garage for the library was not facing the entrance. So the city created two new entrances, one on the north side, one on the south. Is this the best of all possible solutions? I'm not sure, but it was brought to the commission, it went to city council, there was a lot of public input on this, we had a historic consultant working on it, and the decision was made that because this building was treated as a National Register, not just a Glendale Register, but a National Register eligible building, and it's worked. So the functionality of it works. The materials are different, but they're sort of based on some materials you see on the inside. There's some woodwork on the inside of the library. It doesn't overwhelm. The scale of it kind of works. In some ways, I think the little wood entrance that I'm focusing on could even be taller, could go up to the next level and maybe work a little better scale-wise, but other preservationists disagree with me on that. So it's, again, there's always room for debate, no right answers. So the idea of, so that's a good example in Glendale, two examples of Standard 9 being in place. And then the final standard, thank God, is number 10. And the idea is when you're doing an intervention, when you're putting an addition or changing a historic building, to the degree possible, the work should be reversible, meaning you could remove it in the future and the building would still be there. Or, I mean, the character of what was there will remain. So the idea is that if it's undertaken in a manner that allows that to happen, when it's removed in the future, the essential form and integrity of the property and its environment will still be there. So we use the word reversible for that. Same two examples for the final slide. Both of these are really decent examples of reversibility. The Central Library is a little better because all you'd have to do there is get rid of that wood, get rid of the doors, put new pieces of plate glass in there, and it would be pretty much where it was. You'd still have the new stairs in front, so that's another issue, but those could be demolished. The trick with the Brand Library was to create this new entrance. They did have to blow out a large section of the wall at the back of the house, and they found it was a stone construction wall, so it wasn't like, so it's kind of unusual in Glendale to have something like that. The decision was made, though, that it was appropriate because it was a limited area of the total exterior facade of the building. It was at the very back of the building, and the need to kind of create a better, more functional library was paramount for the city. So sacrificing a little bit like that was good. And it could still be rebuilt. The question we hear from some of the advocates in the community and around the city or around the LA area is, well, yeah, anything could be rebuilt if you had the right amount of money. And that's true, and sometimes that's how I justify saying that something meets standard 10. But there are points where, again, that's a little room for debate. And this is a good example of the caveat that we talked about where the commission can step a little bit beyond the standards. Overall, everything about this project meets the standards. There was a little blip on the back where we were losing historic materials and construction technique. But there was so much of that same material, same technique on the rest of the building that you can say, well, yeah, it comes pretty close to meeting the standard if it's not perfect. So, and one thing to remember, again, in closing, is that the standards aren't a checklist. It's not like you go down 1 through 10 and say, meets it, meets it, meets it, does not meet it. Different projects, different properties are gonna have different relationship to the standards. So you're going to, use your judgment, and we're gonna do the same as we think about how do we look at this site, how do we apply the standards. So that's, in not quite a nutshell, maybe a large nutshell, what we've got for you on the standards. And if you have any questions, or we'll go straight to the district guidelines, so.
I have a question. I don't know the answer to this offhand, hence I'm asking you the question. But when the Secretary of the Interior standards were developed, was part of the spirit, did part of the spirit and intent of them involve feasibility at all, or is there any preamble language to the standards that talks about them being feasible that you're aware of?
Yeah, I've seen the word in one of the, sorry, thank you. Well, one of the attachments that you have is the long document that helps figure out how to apply the standards. That talks about economic feasibility in some cases, efforts to promote sustainability. I think I don't know if it has economic justice stuff in there, but especially with sustainability, that's becoming more and more of an issue. So we have historic properties on the Gulf Coast or Charleston, Louisiana, that are being raised up quite high, like 8-10 feet from their former level, so that the next flood, the next storm surge isn't gonna destroy them. That completely changed. That does not meet any straightforward interpretation of the standards, but people are seeing it as necessary. And there's a growing movement, which we'll talk a little bit about in the districts, for our field to be more open to that sort of thinking, which we haven't been historically. So yeah, feasibility does play a role.
Okay. Thanks.
So now we go to, well, I guess we're still in item 8, part B. We're on part B now. So commission training regarding the Glendale Historic District Design Guidelines. First of all, should we take does anybody need a little break? Like, do we need a 10-minute break? How's everybody doing? Everybody doing okay? Doing okay? Okay. That just seems so long. I'm just kidding, Jay. It was actually quite good. So it was actually quite good, but I just wanted to check. So, okay, then we're going to move on to item 8B, commission training regarding the Glendale Historic District Guidelines with Ani. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So this is not going to be probably as long as the Secretary of the Interior Standards presentation, only because there's also going to be a lot of things that we just covered that's probably going to apply to what we're going to see in this portion of the presentation. And most likely there will also be additional questions with the two of them together. So anytime you guys have any questions, please feel free to stop me and we can discuss it. So what is a historic district? I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit, but just to give a little bit of idea of kind of the history of historic districts in Glendale. Over here we have two photos next to each other from our very first historic district in Glendale, which is Royal Boulevard. You can see that the overall planning and the layout of the street is the same, and one thing that you'll notice, which is one of my favorite things about this neighborhood, is the row of palm trees on either side of the street, which in the earlier photo, when it was first being developed, they're cute little tiny baby trees, and then now we have these mature palm trees lining the streets. So it almost seems like the trees were there while the properties were being developed. So we talked a little bit about character-defining features earlier in the first presentation. Overall, when we're thinking about the concept of this neighborhood, if you were to close your eyes, if you were to go to Royal Street Boulevard and you were to close your eyes and open it again, would you feel like you were transported to a different time? And would you feel like you were transported to when that neighborhood was built out? And so that's kind of the purpose of a historic district. It's again, management of change. We do allow changes to happen, but we want that overall essence, that feel, and that character of that period in which that neighborhood was built to be retained. So over here, with that same concept, we're looking at Cottage Grove. It's, again, a very small historic district in Glendale. It's in South Glendale. It's a very small, just a small little street. Most of the homes that were developed on this street were by a developer who wanted the feel of being transported to a little English cottage, English village. So it's all most of them are Tudor Revival style homes. There's other period revival style homes that were eventually built, but the overall character of the neighborhood still is retained as these little English cottages. So when you're there, you almost feel like you're walking in a completely different place. You might not even feel like you're in the United States at that point. So currently the city of Glendale has 9 historic districts. The existing districts are laid out right over here. I don't want to go through all of them, but many of them, as you can see by the way that the map is numbered, are located above the 134 freeway. And as of now, we have 3 pending districts, but they're all in different portions of the nomination process. So Bellhurst, which I'll get into this a little bit later, but right now there was a little bit of a change in the designation process of how we designate historic districts. I'll get to that later, but Bellhurst is right now in the process of the old historic districting process. So we'll go through that as meetings are coming up. But Vertigo Woodlands and Cleveland Knoll are going through the designation process with the new implemented designation process. So they're all in different parts of the designation process, and we'll go through them in a little bit too, not in too much detail. So what is a historic district? And kind of how we saw with the photos of Royal Street and Cottage Grove, it's a significant concentration of buildings, structures, and sites that is united historically and aesthetically. So we're looking at physical development over time. It may be like buildings that all make sense, sort of like Cottage Grove, or it may be the social and development pattern that was important to the city. So for instance, with Royal Street that we saw, let me go back to the photo, you can kind of see that there's different architectural styles even from this aerial, we have tile roofs over here, we have a gabled roof, so that kind of gives you an indication that it's not all the same architectural style, but that development of the neighborhood and its social and historic context for Glendale was significant in its preservation. Whereas with Cottage Grove, it's a significant cluster of similar architectural styles. So there can be different reasons to designate a historic district. And so when we're looking at it, we're looking at this as neighborhoods that are worthy of protection for its historic and architectural significance.
Just have one quick
Yes.
question. I can't remember the districts in Glendale have their own set of eligibility criteria, right?
Right, yes.
Are you going to be showing those, or is this based off those?
So I'm not going to directly go into very specifics about the eligibility criteria.
I just have one quick question then about the first point. So for districts in Glendale, is there, the fact that United, oh, never mind, sorry. I take it all back. I thought it said United historically or aesthetically. It says historically and. So the implication here is that if something is determined eligible for its aesthetics, that those aesthetics have historic significance, not just feel or charm of the past. They have to
Right.
be, the aesthetics have to be historically significant.
Right,
Okay.
yeah.
I just want to be sure. Sometimes aesthetics or design gets separated out from historic events, and I read that quickly as historically or, but it's and.
Yeah, and so in the process of the historic designation process, typically whenever like the consultant is hired, which is one of the steps in
Right.
creating historic districts, they do look into that too. So beyond just like a windshield survey of driving down streets, seeing like, is this aesthetically like uniform? Does this make sense? But they also look into the history to see if there's historic significance and context based on the criteria of what would be considered significant, like a significant historic district. Some of those things that we look at is social and development patterns that are important to the city, and perhaps even the larger like Southern California area, or even,
Patterns.
yeah.
But I was asking in terms of that the aesthetic is not just unified or concentrated, but that the aesthetic, that the design itself is historically significant. So it has to be a historically significant example of Tudor. It can't just be a unified example of Tudor.
So with those, so for instance, when we're looking at like a Glendale Register, we're thinking about like the best of the best of like Tudor revival homes. But like in a historic district, there's an understanding that changes can happen. So if, let's say, there is a Tudor revival home that may potentially have had replacement windows, that's a loss of a certain type of character defining feature, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the home overall in its essence is no longer architecturally significant. So we look at it a little bit more differently. I think I'm going to get into that a little bit more later on.
Okay.
But it's part of that management of change where it's not, there isn't this expectation that within a district that everything has
Real quickly,
remained as.
real quickly though, but like, so just because, let's say there's a district that has a concentration of Tudor buildings, period. Just because it has a concentration of Tudor buildings doesn't necessarily make it aesthetically significant. It has to, that concentration, even if some are a little bit off, has to be a significant example, like a really good, fairly intact example of Tudor. It can't just be Tudor.
Yeah.
No. In a district, individual properties are not necessarily historic or historically meaningful. They have things that link them historically, aesthetically, scale, different things. So you don't have to say that for a Tudor to be a contributor in a district, it's an important, aesthetically significant Tudor. It's just one of many period revival houses. We have 7 criteria to designate a district. The district only needs to meet one of them, but most of our districts meet 3 to 5, I would say.
Okay, but I'm not talking about individual houses at all in this case. I'm talking about if you had a bunch of Tudors. If you had a bunch of Tudors in a district, just because it's a bunch of Tudors doesn't necessarily make it aesthetically significant. That bunch of Tudors on the whole would have to be aesthetically significant example of Tudor, is what I'm saying.
Not necessarily.
Oh, okay.
A grouping of Tudor houses is somewhat unusual. That's why Cottage Grove got designated. None of them are great, perfect examples of Tudor revival, but they're very nice. But the ensemble together creates a feeling, like Ani said, that's different from most other neighborhoods.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Okay. Moving on to the next points in terms of historic districts. So we went over like the worthy of protection, and just to emphasize, the only areas that are visible from the street are protected. So I'll show a graphic on kind of how we assess that and what we take a look at and kind of help explain to the audience who does live in a historic district or is considering one. Also, it's a zoning overlay. So if you're in an R1 district, that zoning is going to stay. That's not going to change. So it's an overlay, and your underlying zoning will still remain. So the Historic District Ordinance and the design guidelines for districts were approved by council at the end of 2006, and some revisions were adopted by council in 2019. And as staff, we use the design guidelines for historic districts to inform a lot of the decisions made on projects. And like Jay said, a lot of these projects we take care of at staff level, but some of the bigger ones within historic districts that we cannot make the findings perhaps that meets the standards will come in front of the commission. And also the review of a historic district application will come in front of the commission, and not just the application itself, but within other steps of the historic districting process, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for public input, which the commission will be a part of as well. So in some senses, some people may find that design review requirements can be stricter for areas outside of the district. Some of those things may be, for instance, the one that comes to mind, which is one of the more often examples, is vinyl windows. Whereas you can do vinyl windows outside of like within the city for non-historic district properties, you can do it on the front or visible from the street. But within historic districts, wherever visible from the street, vinyl is not permitted. So we do consider other materials. There isn't this expectation that it has to be wood windows, let's say on a house that originally had wood. We can consider other material options, but we want that depth, the frame, the operation to still feel as if it is compatible with the style of the house. And vinyl windows, even though there's a lot of changes in technology, does not seem to have the compatibility with historic windows that perhaps other newer materials may have. But if it's on the back of the residence and you want to do vinyl, go ahead. If it's not visible, we don't care, it's fine. And then we also assess visibility from the street in a specific manner too, which I'll get into. So it doesn't mean that all windows on side elevations have to conform to this. Some windows may perhaps be vinyl. It just depends on the visibility from the property line. So there's some common misconceptions, similar to how we went over in the first presentation, that changes are expected to buildings. Historic districts don't freeze a neighborhood in time, and we acknowledge as preservation specialists and people who live in historic homes that buildings do change over the course of history, and this is anticipated to continue in a district. So especially when property owners own a home, when it becomes a historic district, that doesn't mean that you can no longer make changes. You can propose changes, you can propose additions, and like I mentioned, historic review only applies to the parts that are visible from the street. And we don't do any review of interior alterations. So sometimes, let's say a project may come in front of the commission that has a floor plan on there, and we just expect floor plans to be submitted as part of the design package, the architectural plans. But we don't look at interior alterations as if we're preserving historic materials. And it's expected that, lifestyles have changed over time, the way we live and has changed. And if people want to change their kitchen, no one's tied or bound to a 1950s kitchen. Although personally, I would say some of those kitchens are pretty incredible. They had great features. And then again, just the change aspect of it. We want to just avoid diminishing the overall character of the building and the neighborhood, and we still want to allow for the neighborhood and the home to change to meet the homeowner's needs. So we'll look at things like oftentimes window change outs. There's no expectation that the historic windows are going to remain unless the homeowner wants to maintain them and repair them. But some homeowners may want, especially for energy efficiency, newer windows or a replacement of a roof. For instance, asphalt shingle is one of those compatible materials that we may propose for, let's say, a craftsman style home. Whereas for a Spanish colonial, that's not necessarily the appropriate one. So we'll just assess design changes like that. Okay. And so to move into the designation process, this is a current designation process for historic districts that was approved by council. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to give you a sense of how it works is the parts that are blue are where public input is going to be welcome. We're going to send out public noticing. It's going to go on our website. It's going to be in front of a board or a body, and the public's going to have access to materials and be able to share their thoughts on the historic districting process. The parts that are gray are the administrative aspects of it, so that's kind of what we work on at JNI as staff in the process of getting these districts designated. And ultimately, there are multiple steps that we go through, not just administratively, but with public input before the application is presented to council for their vote, whether it's going to be a historic district or not. And because, you know, this isn't like a 100% concrete process, of course, there are things that may potentially be a little bit out of the ordinary. We've kind of factored that in. That's why you'll see the dashed boxes for optional petitions and optional hearings, where perhaps if there doesn't seem to be a lot of like information as required, the commission or council may ask for either an optional petition or an optional hearing, which that was previously built into the old process. And based off of the previous historic districts, it just seemed like there was a majority of support for the historic district. So it just seemed like steps were being repeated. So this is a much streamlined version of it, a much cleaner version of it, but with the understanding and expectation that not everything is going to fit into the streamlined new box. So these dashed boxes are just placed in there as an opportunity for if things are not, if necessary, we have the option for a petition or an additional hearing. I'm not going to go through all of this, but currently this is the number of historic districts that we have, the designated ones and the pending historic districts. You can see, and I want to just bring everyone's attention to the percentage of contributors and the percentage of properties here. You'll notice that there's a significant number. Typically, it has to be like 50% of support, but most of the time, a lot of these historic districts meet more, surpass that. And as staff, we do want to encourage, community effort and for a lot of support, because people have to live in these neighborhoods, and we want to make sure that most of the community is in support of historic districts.
Ani, what does second petition mean?
So this is still part, like the second petition as it's laid out in this table refers to the old designation process. Right now we don't, let me go back to this. We don't have that second petition, we just have the petition over here. But initially the older process would have had 2 petitions. So that second petition is to show like which number of properties we're showing support, but the first one has been eliminated. So right now we just have that second petition.
Oh, okay, so the percentage under petition is the percentage of property owners that supported the district.
And I think Jay can.
Yeah, it's actually the percentage of properties. We require all owners of a single property to either support or not sign the petition. So a married couple, For example, both people need to sign the petition, then we count the number of properties. The two petition process originally was, the first petition was to request that city council fund a survey. And then the second petition is requesting that city council designate the district.
Okay.
And that's where we need at least 50% of the properties to have signed. And we always tell people to shoot for much more than that to prove to council that you've really got support in this neighborhood. We've told people to go for 70, we've had 80, 86, but we've also had some lower numbers, and council has still supported the district.
Is that percentage just contributors or non-contributors also? Okay, thank you.
Owners of those properties.
The properties, okay.
So in large part, majority of folks tend to support districts?
From our experience, based off of the previous historic districts that we've had, a majority of the neighborhood does support the historic district
they're-
creation.
Kind of three groups that this falls into. People who support the district, we have an affirmative signature on a petition. If someone does not support a district, there are two ways to express that. One is you don't sign the petition, or opponents of a district. And one thing we should have mentioned, that's my fault, this is a grassroots effort. The city's not looking at neighborhoods and saying you should become a district. We're waiting for people to come to us with an application. 3 property owners within the boundary that they propose need to apply for a district status. So in terms of opposition, you either don't sign the pro-district petition, or there's a process to circulate an opposition petition, which may be coming our way for the Verdugo Woodlands neighborhood. We don't know about others at this point. But the other thing to note is there are also people, the signature process is driven by the proponents. In the past have gone door to door. During COVID, people were very clever and worked out all kinds of contactless ways to reach their neighbors. I imagine we'll be going back to door. Here's the information. I'll leave it with you if you're not sure. If you know that you support, please sign. If you don't support, thank you for your time. But a lot of people can't be reached. So there's a third group of people where the proponents try once, twice, 3 times. They leave materials, and then we just don't get a response. We don't know that those people oppose. We don't know that they support, and we'll never know what that number really is. But that's the basic breakdown of people in the districts.
And who's going to door? Who's initiating that after the 3
proponents-
property owners came by?
The proponents are doing their petition and information distribution. If we have an opposition petition, the opponents are doing the same thing. What we try to make sure is whichever side is doing it, we want them to be sharing accurate information. And we're not there. So we have to work with them up front to make sure they have the information that they can be distributing. And the city staff, the reason it was chosen this way, and this goes back to like 2005, I think, was basically, we're not involved in that. It's like, this is your baby. Tell us what your neighbors think, pro or con, and let us know what you find.
Commissioner Durham, do you have a question?
Just to reiterate what Jay was talking about, former Commissioner Kathy Yurka used to always make this point, which I think is really important, that just because a neighborhood only gets 60% of signatures approving the district, that is not the same as saying 40% of the neighborhood opposes it. Usually there's 10 to 20, perhaps more, percent that you just don't get a response. So you don't know if they'd be for or against it. You just can never get in contact with them. So I just wanted, it's a really important point to keep in mind, because most people assume, oh, 60% approval, 40% of the neighborhood was against it. That's not necessarily true.
Related to Commissioner Durham's point, does the city, I don't see a column there for it, I don't think, but does the city keep track of a percentage of just non-respondents?
I think Jay can answer to that, but I don't think we do. That's not something that we necessarily get because this is a community-driven effort. The percentage of responses we get is
Right.
based off of the petition that the community and the
Makes sense. I
proponents
see.
give to us.
Okay.
Historically, we've only had one opposition petition, which was for Royal Boulevard, the first historic district. By the time we got to meeting with the commission and city council, a lot of people had changed their votes on that. People had moved out of the area, the new people supported or opposed. So it's kind of a funny number, but if we have a petition drive where we have an active pro, please designate, and an active no, we don't want this, we can presume, we'll figure out what that number is after we see what those two numbers are, but in the past, we haven't had that ability.
Okay, thank you.
So, and Chair Paul, to your point about the criteria, I'm not going to go into all of the criteria, but as you can see here in the criteria column, it tells you which of the 7 criteria that each of the historic districts met. And like Jay said, typically you only need to meet one for a historic district to be a historic district. But most of them far exceed that minimum requirement of 1. And so, and this is beyond just doing a windshield survey of driving up and down and seeing if, like, visually if these homes qualify as a historic district, but there's also a research aspect of it where the consultant team will look into the history, will pull permits, maps, and see if fits into more than just one. And most of them have been able to meet at least like 6 of the criteria that we have laid out for historic districts. But
I miscounted, so I was doing the alphabet, turning them into numbers in my head. It's 8, not 7. So
8,
yeah,
okay.
we go up to
And
H.
who ultimately decides if a district meets the criteria? Is it staff, or is it, is the applicant of the neighborhood required to hire a consultant, or do you ever get district nominations just done by the neighborhood?
So when we get the district application in, there's an expectation that the proponents who are applying for the district have already researched it, and so that they can tell us why they believe this neighborhood should be a historic district. So the nomination application itself typically has a pretty good amount of information. So when we get that application in, similar to how we may not similar, but I just want to make a parallel to how we may treat like a Glendale Register property, where we expect there to be information about the history of the home. We expect there to be information about the history, the development of the historic district. If it's connected to some significant developer or architect, let's just say, we expect there to be that information too, so that as staff, when we're reviewing it and preparing it to bring it in front of commission, we have an understanding at that point, based off of the application and very preliminary review that we've done, whether or not it would meet at least one of these categories. So when we're kind of drafting our staff report, we as staff take that into consideration. And as commissioners, you would too when that application, let's say, comes in front of you for review. And if there seems to be substantial information within that application to keep the historic district designation process moving forward, from that point on, let me just go back to this, it would be time for staff to put out the request for proposals, and the city council authorizes the funding and the contract of the survey. And at that point, the consultant looks into this much deeper to see, is it true that the application, is the application substantial? Is there additional information that is perhaps found? So that work is done by the consultant team that is hired by the
So if a
city.
neighborhood wants to let's say a neighborhood wants to landmark their district, is there ever a possible circumstance, or has it happened, where the city just hasn't had the budget to hire a consultant? And then what would happen in that case? Can the neighborhood write their own landmark application for the district, or must a consultant always be hired to complete it?
We always bring a consultant in that establishes kind of a more objective viewpoint than either staff would bring if we wrote it, which we're not ever going to do, or if we accepted applications from the community. Ani's right about how, we expect the applicant to tell us which of the 8 criteria they think their district meets, just like for Glendale Register, we have 4 criteria for designation, and we ask them to tell us that. My experience over the years is, well, of course my house meets all 4 criteria. So we at staff level, before you ever see it, will vet whether we support their thinking and determination or not. So when we bring it to you, we're bringing you what we believe. You'll have the application, and we'll acknowledge where we disagree, possibly, with the applicant. Ultimately, we wait for the consultant who's doing the historical research, the background research, the property-to-property observation of what's on the ground. We give their assessment a lot of weight, but even then, some consultants come back with something where it's like, well, this district's very similar to the district next door, because a lot of our districts are kind of concentrated in the foothills of the Verdugos. And we have a dialogue. We'll talk about, oh, do you think maybe this meets it or not? And if they push hard on something, I got it, that makes sense. But ultimately, you're the decision maker as a commission, and then ultimately city council. So there can be different steps along the way with the criteria where we disagree or agree.
And Ani or Jake, can you tell us in a nutshell, just in a very general sense, how are the district eligibility criteria different than those of the GR?
There's a little bit of overlap, and I wish I had all of them here.
We don't have them here. We're a little in the weeds.
Yeah.
They're different because we're,
I can pull them up,
Okay.
too.
yeah, just pull them up, yeah. But because there are 8 of them, they're differently drawn. They're more similar to our old Glendale Register criteria where we used to have 7. And this goes back to when we started writing the code. I've made personally a number of changes over the years to the code, but some of it just lingers for a long time. So, so we're not going to have, like, for example, we have a similar one for association with a person who's significant. Most of our districts aren't going to have that.
Right.
But Ross Moyne did, because the Haddock Nibley Company and the 2 men who kind of ran that company had a significant impact in the neighborhood, lived in the district, donated Nibley Park to the city, so it's named after Mr. Nibley. Neodrar Drive was associated with a significant developer. So it's going to be different, but here they are.
Okay.
And it actually goes
Oh,
up
there are
to
9.
I. Yeah, we have 9.
Never used
Yeah,
I.
we've never used. So I'll quickly go through them. So A, which it seems like most of them did meet criteria A, is exemplifies or reflects special elements of the city's cultural, social, economic.
Sorry, this is for district or GR?
This is district.
District,
Yeah.
okay.
GR is the same as the National Register.
Yeah.
Got it, okay.
Daniel knows what that means. The rest of you don't need to at this point.
Okay.
We'll learn it when we do a register
So
nomination.
this is district, okay.
Yes, this is
Go ahead.
district. And then and you'll notice that some of the wording overlaps a little on parallels with Glendale Register. So exemplifies or reflects special elements of the city's cultural, social, economic, political, aesthetic, engineering, architectural, or natural history. A long way of saying it is an example of the city's heritage and culture, in a sense. B is identified with persons or events significant in local, state, or national history. For instance, with Ross Moyne, that's one that would qualify. As you can see, most of them don't meet. Some of them meet B.
I hope I was right about that. Okay.
C is embodies distinctive characteristics of a style, type, period, method of construction. So for that, it would be like Cottage Grove would meet that, because we're on Tudors today. We're talking Tudors today. So that would be an example of something that meets the distinctive characteristics of like an overall style, perhaps.
Except it wasn't, so.
Oh, wait, sorry, yeah.
That would be a kind of district that we don't even have in Glendale. It would be like Riverside, New York, that was was laid out by Frederick Law Olmsted. And the whole concept of that neighborhood came from the mind of one person. So, and then, I'm sorry, and then the designs also kind of were
Well, we
coming-
have the Americana, that all came from Caruso.
50 years down the line.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Funny enough, I went to my old high school to speak to them about what we do as historic preservation planners, and I asked what's special to you, and a lot of them said Americana. So maybe 50 years down the line, someone's going to say Americana.
Exceptional significance for the statue, for the gold statue guy,
course.
so.
Moving forward with the design the criteria, D represents the work of notable builders, designers, or architects. E has a unique location or is a view or vista representing an established and familiar visual feature of a neighborhood of the community. So that's a little bit more, one of those criteria that's a little bit more difficult to meet. F embodies a collection of elements of architectural design, materials, craftsmanship that represents a significant structural or architectural achievement or innovation. G reflects significant geographic patterns. Oftentimes that is associated with different eras of settlement and growth, transportation modes, distinctive examples of park and community planning. H conveys a sense of historic and architectural cohesiveness through its design, setting, materials, workmanship, and most of them also would meet criteria H. And I, the final one, has been designated a historic district in the National Register or the California Register of Historic Resources.
Is there any preamble language to those criteria? I know in the National Register, it says this must exhibit a quality of significance, and then it goes into the criteria. Is there anything like that here?
Right, so ours, the way that the code is written, states that it's a geographic area that may be designated as a historic district overlay zone based off of the recommendation of the Historic Preservation Commission by council and Planning Commission if the district meets one of these following criteria.
Okay. Go ahead. Commissioner Durham.
First, a disclosure. Like Commissioner Cusick, I live in the proposed Cleveland Knoll Historic District, and I won't be expressing any opinion on that potential district or participating in any hearings or decisions. But I just wanted to say, I recently witnessed the consultants doing the historic architectural survey in the neighborhood, and it was really impressive. I mean, it's boots on the ground. They're not just driving through quickly and taking pictures. They stop in front of every home. They have their laptops. They spend quite a bit of time in front of each home, inputting information and taking pictures. And they are very well qualified because I spoke to several of them on my block. And I was just really impressed. I just wanted the commission to know that that isn't any kind of slapdash, type of method. It's very thorough. Thank you.
And just one quick question. Who pays for the consultant in Glendale? Is it the neighborhood or the city?
It's the city.
It's the city?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And we've never had council say no, but it is a possibility. If they were to do that, we'd be at city attorney's office talking because there's no clear direction of what we would do at that point right
Right.
now in the code. So
Right, okay.
let's go there if we have to go there.
Okay, so what happens after a historic district is adopted? Let's just say everything goes well for the community and it's adopted. So when a property owner lives or owns a property in a historic district, they are not required to do any work on their property as mandated by the city. routine repairs and maintenance is expected, and they don't require review or permits. And one of those examples that's oftentimes used is if your kid is playing ball outside and they throw a baseball through your window, window breaks, and you got to fix that window, you don't have to come and tell us that, you can fix your window. That's part of routine repairs or maintenance. If there's any like paint upgrades that you need to do, like we said, we don't regulate paint. You can, with a few exceptions, I would say, we don't regulate paint otherwise. We don't do historic design review for any interior work. Permits are still going to be required, and so that's, I think, an important distinction to make, is that even though the commission and historic preservation staff are not going to review interior work, applicants still need to apply for building permits in order to conduct that work. Sometimes some people may think like, oh, if windows are on, like also on the interior, does that count? That's because it's visible from the exterior. That's going to be something that would be reviewed. And the fee structure is also something that often is a concern. But the fee structure for planning and building and safety does not change for historic districts. It's going to be the same across the board. And like I mentioned, the underlying zoning is going to remain the same. So if a homeowner is coming in with a project, they would still need to meet setbacks, height limitations, parking requirements, density, FAR. So all of that will still be reviewed in accordance to its underlying zoning.
Yeah, I mean, I have a question about where this can get gray is with ADUs. And I'm wondering, has this been an issue yet, or has it come up?
So ADUs are mandated by state law. We do allow for ADUs in historic districts. In terms of ADUs in historic districts, we want more housing. A lot of property owners do tend to convert their garages to ADUs, but in terms of reviewing the ADU application, we'll look at it to try to make sure that the spatial relationship is retained and it still kind of reads like an accessory structure, a garage from the street, but those conversions are fine, they're possible. So a lot of whatever the state says in terms of accessory dwelling units precedes a lot of like regular zoning ordinances, like for parking and things like that. But with historic districts, like for instance, if you're constructing an ADU in the back that's not visible, that's fine. Garage conversions are fine, accessory structure conversions. We just work with the applicants, so.
Yeah, we've,
Please.
just to flesh that out a little, every January, the ADU laws change, it seems. So when we first were doing this, from the beginning, there were members of the preservation community and people in our historic districts were saying, no ADUs, no ADUs. None of us here on staff agreed with that. We get that housing is a crisis and we need to bring this kind of housing into the world. Our original code that we wrote for this was ADUs in a historic district cannot be visible from the street. Then the state started pushing, not at us specifically, but in general. Our city attorney's office was like, we can't go there. Now, like Ani said, when there's a garage conversion, we try to keep the garage looking like a garage, which sometimes means we want something that looks like a garage door, even if it's really a wall. And it's been very successful. Other cities say, oh, that's a good idea. They like that. But we're only one January away from being told, no, nothing. So we want to be able to make these fit in. We don't want to deny anyone their right to have this kind of unit. So we're trying to do this balancing act, so.
Is there any version of the standards that are used in looking at ADUs in historic districts?
No, there's a separate set of, well, ADUs in general, we can't do design review on.
But I mean, is there an effort to try to make them compatible with the buildings that the older buildings that they're
We
being?
try to keep the garage looking like a garage. Sometimes we have to allow a garage to be demolished. You can't
Right.
always convert an existing garage. We still try to keep thing is looking, when you look down the driveway, you're going to see something that looks like it used to look like, even if it's not.
I'm talking about if there's like a freestanding ADU built not in the garage, but like if there was a freestanding new
When I
building.
said we push back, we try to maintain the roof form. We try to maintain the window relationship with the wall in terms of the window being inset into the wall instead of flush with the wall. We try to get the material palette to reflect that of the house. But again, that's, that's what we're trying to do. And that's standard for non-historic. We don't have a specific, we haven't changed any of our 3 historic ordinances, or the Title 3025 of the municipal code covers historic districts. It's one of the links that I shared with everyone. It's on the website. We didn't revise that to talk about historic districts, so this is a policy decision that we're implementing at staff level. But within that, we do have the ADU ordinance in Title 47, the design review chapter. Is that where it is? 3047?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that does the things that I just mentioned. So we have a very light touch on how we look at it.
Okay. Go ahead.
Mills Act properties, we do have more say about.
I see. Okay. Commissioner Durham?
It's my understanding that another state law that overrides local zoning authority is SB 9, which allows single-family lots to be split into 2 and up to 4 units built on that single-family lot, which is a great threat to, our existing neighborhoods in terms of just the look, the feel. And it's my understanding that SB 9 does not apply currently to homes in historic districts, which would be another reason that historic districts could really protect the quality and the character of our residential neighborhoods. Am I right, Jay?
You're right, SB 9 at this point, subject to change, doesn't apply. In our built-out neighborhoods, the bigger issues with SB 9 are in the hillside, previously unbuilt areas where we have, paper streets and parcels that could be
What's
combined.
SB 9? Can you explain?
Oh, it's a way to densify single-family neighborhoods through subdivision of properties, like Alan said. You can subdivide a lot into 2 pieces, and you can build 2 houses, 1 house on each, and then you can have, I think, an ADU on each. I don't think you can have 4 houses.
No, you can have 4 units. You can have
4 units, yeah.
You can have 2 duplexes.
Right, okay, yeah, that's right. So, but in most of our flatland areas where the houses stretch the width of the lot within the zoning constraints and the driveway constraints, what we're finding is the more likely scenario is someone who has a very deep lot will create what's called a flag lot, where you have a long driveway that runs along one side, and then the former large backyard of the property can be divided off and another house built back there. That could happen anyway. We have a process to subdivide lots. That's what I think would be more likely in a historic district, especially in the flatland parts of the districts. And that wouldn't be nearly as intrusive or disruptive to the neighborhood. But again, every year we're going to be playing this and figuring out what's next. But SB 9 hasn't hit the districts at this point significantly, but it's getting closer. We're seeing we didn't get a ton, we expected a ton of applications. We've gotten a trickle, and but I think it's picking up a little bit.
What about solar panels in a historic district?
So again, state law for solar panels trumps any local regulations. So people can propose it. We do typically, we would want to suggest or recommend maybe placing it on parts of the roof that are not visible from the street, but that's not always necessary. I mean, that's not always possible. So solar panels are permitted in historic districts, and The only properties that we do review solar panel location installation on is Glendale Register Mills Act nomination.
Actually,
project.
just Mills Act.
Oh, Mills Act, yeah. Okay, thank you guys. So, when in a historic district, when you do need to do work, the permit process is similar to any other process for the city. So you would apply for the proper planning approvals prior to doing your building and safety services permit. Some additional exterior changes that perhaps don't require a permit are going to be subject to review. So for instance, if someone wants to replace their front door, that's something we would want to take a look at on staff and just assess and make sure that the door that's being proposed is going to be compatible for the style of the house. Character defining features, if something is being proposed to be like perhaps shutters on a home, which may be appropriate on a colonial style home. That's something that we may want to review if any changes are being proposed to that. And back to the color, we don't regulate color. You don't need to ask for permission or pull any permits for that, except for half timbering on Tudor Revival style homes. Because the half timbering on those homes are an important feature of that style of house, painting all of it one singular color is going to be something that removes that character of the residence. So that's something that we would want to work with the applicant to make sure that that doesn't happen and that feature is still preserved. We don't regulate landscape, and the city has an ordinance that we do want drought-resistant landscaping, unless the survey says it's historically important. Within historic districts, I don't think that, and maybe Jay can confirm this when he's back, I don't think we've had that in Glendale, where a landscape is like a very important character defining feature of the historic district, and oftentimes landscaping is one of those things that's anticipated to change, but there is an expectation, just like any good neighbor, that the front setback, the landscaping would just be nice and retained and looks good. And we do also have different rules for contributors and non-contributors, which I'll get into. So basically, when a survey report is prepared, the homes are divided into two sections: contributing properties and non-contributing properties. So a contributor is built within the period of significance that makes that historic district eligible for designation. And in addition to it being built in that period of significance, it needs to still have enough of its historic features that contributes to the character of the neighborhood. So if, let's say, something is built within the period of significance, but it's been changed so much where it can no longer be recognized as a home built of that time, then it can't be a contributor. Now, for non-contributors, it's either built before or after the period of significance. Alterations have removed a lot of those character-defining features. For instance, it may have been a craftsman style with wood siding, now no longer has the original wood siding. It no longer has a roof that looks the style of the craftsman. Windows have perhaps changed. So a lot of things are kind of accumulating to make this a non-contributor. And therefore it no longer contributes to the character of the neighborhood. However, it is possible for properties especially that are, let's say, built before or after the period of significance, it's possible that that house is significant on its own. So just because the property is a non-contributor in a district does not automatically negate it from being a potential historic resource. So a mid-century modern house in a historic district where the period of significance is, let's just say, 1924 to 1936, it doesn't contribute to the district, but it can still be important on its own. And that would be something that we would consider, let's just say if the property owner wants to put it on the Glendale Register, that's when we would assess it as an individual application.
Commissioner Durham?
Ani, once the consultants complete the survey and the planning department, finalizes it, What is the percentage required of contributors for it to be an eligible neighborhood for a historic district? There's a percentage, right?
Yeah, it's typically 60%. Is that the case? Yeah, 60%. So, and yeah, there's an expectation that neighborhoods have changed over time, and that also depends on, like, of course, the overall character. So 60%, it just seems like is something that's also standard in other cities as well.
Although if something comes in at 60, if we lose one property, it might go below the threshold. So the commission may, or council may, take into account, let's get a buffer higher than 60. Most of our districts have been well over 60. So.
So, oh my goodness, what happened to this slide? But anyway, so how to use the historic district design guidelines. So it's a really big document. It may potentially seem overwhelming at first, but it's really not. It's organized in different sections. So the most important thing before we start getting into the historic district design guidelines is that each and every property has a record of its architectural style, the residence, at the time that the survey is done. And this is the survey form that all cities use for surveys that comes to us from the State of California Department of Parks and Recreation. So this is the primary record form. This is the main thing that we're going to focus on today. There's other sheets too, but we're not going to get into that.
And if you guys want to learn how to wonk out, you're going to hear us talk about DPR forms all the time. Department of Parks and Recreation, 523A, B, or D are the forms that we may see, or A and D primarily for a district. And we just say DPRs. So you'll learn that very quickly, I'm sure.
And I think most of the projects that do come to commission will have like the survey form also attached as an exhibit. So you'll get a chance to see this multiple times while you're on the board. So there's two main things to look out for on the primary record. And for historic districts, all of these records are available online for the public to view and access them on our website. And we're in the process of updating the individually surveyed properties, which is a tedious process, but we're making way with that.
Bonnie's making headway, I'm not. So.
I was
We're a team,
yes,
so
we
we're
are a
making
team.
headway.
Yeah. So the two things to look out for is at the very top right corner over here, the NRHP status code. For this one, as you can see, it's a 5B. Typically, if you see a 5, that would mean it's a contributor, it's a historic property. And in addition to that, where there's other identifier listed here, we will try to, like the consultant will most likely say, in addition to it being an element of a certain historic district, that it's also whether it's a contributor or not. 5B in this case means it's not only a contributor to the historic district, but it's also individually significant as well. It's also going to, and before I move into the description, and if it's a non-contributor, it's going to be a 7 DNC code, district non-contributor. And then another important factor is the description of the property and character defining features. This formatting where it says property type, site primary architectural feature, this is the choice that this consultant made. So not every form will have this categorization, but it should have this information easily accessible to understand the architectural style, what types of windows, features it may have, what kind of alterations have perhaps happened. So all of those are noted. And because these are windshield surveys, perhaps, when a project comes forward, we as staff take a look at properties a lot closer. But these are a pretty accurate record of its time of that residence. So it's a really handy tool for not just staff and the commission, but also property owners and local groups as well. So the historic district design guidelines, now that we've understood kind of what is on that DPR form, that is very helpful in informing us, property owners, applicants, designers on how to use the district guidelines. So for instance, here, if it says the architectural style is Mission Revival, or let's say Spanish Colonial Revival, within the Historic District guidelines, we not only have a general section that speaks about generally like windows, doors, setting of the residence, accessory structures, but we also have categories that are divided based off of the architectural style. So like I said, it's a big document, but you don't have to worry about that because we're not going to be reviewing multiple types of homes in one project. We're going to only focus on the part of the guidelines that is related to that specific project. So the most important thing for any applicant is to first determine the scope of the project, identify the architectural style on the survey form, which we just took a look at, read the section of the guidelines that would apply to the architectural style, and then reach out to planning staff. We're very friendly. We try to help applicants out as best as possible. And so we'll work with the the applicant team on their project. So these guidelines are going to give more detailed guidance than other city guidelines for historic districts. We cover major building elements plus the 13 common architectural styles that are often found in historic districts. Again, applies only areas visible from the street and immediately adjacent from the immediate adjacent property. And we do treat contributors and non-contributors a little bit differently, and that's something that based off of the project case-by-case basis, we're going to take a look at that individually. And they're guidelines and not rules. So when the commission is reviewing something within a historic district that comes in front of you, it's not only how can we get the best possible project out of what is being proposed, but using the historic district design guidelines as a way of making sure that whatever is being proposed is going to not diminish the character of the property and the overall character of the neighborhood. So when we're looking at the work proposed, like we look at a few different things. If it's visible from the street, staff level review, if the work conforms to the district, we can most likely as staff approve it at staff level. Most of these projects won't come in front of the commission. If it's visible from the street, perhaps it's something that may come to the commission, and we'll get into a few quick examples in a little bit. And the thresholds for public hearing, whether you're in a historic district or not, are the same.
Sorry. We just changed the code. So this is a former presentation that we recycled and tried to make some changes. I didn't notice this. The thresholds are now different outside of districts than inside. And what I mean by that is we had a code that said, and the code that applies for design review for all properties in the city was that staff level approval can't be given for addition of 200 square feet or more at the front of a property, or 700 square feet or more at the rear of a property. We changed that so that we now don't allow staff approval for any addition at the front of a property, visible area, but we allow an infinite addition at the rear as long as it meets all other aspects of zoning review. So we didn't change the historic district ordinance. And we're keeping the 200, we still have the 200, 700 threshold. It's very unlikely that staff would take upon ourselves to approve a 200 square foot addition at the front of a house. Conceivably, we could do a 40 square foot addition in certain situations or something. So for now, we're going to leave that differential, and we'll try to remember to change this for the future.
Durham?
Sorry about that.
I remember a recent case that came before the commission. I was interested in the process of how when planning staff denies an applicant the ability, this had to do with a covered exterior porch on the second floor where the owner wanted to convert it to an enclosed sunroom. And that's not historic, and it's not permitted. And the owner came to Design Review Commission, I think after you turned him down on that.
No,
But
he appealed.
how does that process work?
He appealed the HPC decision. It came to HPC. HPC approved an addition at the rear of the house. We'll show a picture of it in a minute. HPC approved a large addition at the rear of the house, but denied the enclosure of the balcony and denied the removal of the front wood windows. So the applicant appealed an approval, but just those two parts that he was dissatisfied with. And council approved the window change out, but didn't approve the balcony enclosure.
But I guess what I didn't understand is how it got to, from your planning, aspect to this commission.
Oh, because it was a large addition. Well, we didn't think that the enclosure of the balcony met the guidelines. The windows weren't the issue for us, it was the balcony. And we also have a provision in the code, we call it the notwithstanding clause. The addition was 1,200 square feet, so it was over the 700 square foot threshold. So that's mandatory HPC. But, well, that's not true. We could do that through a process called administrative design review, which involves public noticing, but it doesn't come to you or to DRB if it were a non-historic property. But we felt that that was a large enough addition. We didn't have experience looking at anything that significant in a district before. So we brought it to HPC. That was a staff decision.
But any owner in a historic district who wants to do something like enclose the porch and make a sunroom, which shouldn't be allowed, I mean, typically wouldn't be under guidelines, if they disagree with you, they can request to come before this commission to argue their point?
They could, that's not usually how it works. We usually tell them that we can't approve it at staff level. Your next option is to go to the commission, and then they decide whether they want to do that or not.
Okay, but that's how they would get
Yeah,
here.
we don't deny things at staff level. We just say, this is what we're allowed to approve, this is what we're not allowed to approve, or we don't feel is appropriate to approve.
Or I think in some instances, wouldn't you write a staff report and then it comes in front of us with the findings of your staff report?
Right, but
Then we sort of take what staff said in the staff report and make that informs whatever choice we make. It doesn't necessarily dictate it, but,
Yeah.
so they've looked at it, they've written something up, and then it could come in front of us.
And yeah, at that point, that's when the applicant has decided that they don't, they still want the commission to hear their project, and they don't really contend with staff's determination that they're not satisfied with us saying we can't approve something, so.
I just wanted to point out that owners have that option. They may not pursue it often, but,
The option to,
well, if you don't agree with something they want to do, they can bring it to this commission.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just,
Reconsideration.
it's usually not, but the reality is the owner doesn't say, you staff, I'm going to bring this to the commission. We say, actually, you do have, your next step would be to go to the commission. They have to apply for that. There's a design review fee they have to pay. We try to help people do things at staff level as much as possible. Like we said, most of our projects get reviewed at staff level, but there are certain needs or desires that people have that go beyond what the guidelines suggest we should approve, or that we're comfortable doing outside of a public forum.
So, sorry, and any other questions or okay. We talked a lot about visibility from the street, and this is kind of what we use to assess what is visible from the street. So it's at the property line, we don't necessarily always go further. We kind of just assess based off of like our site visit. We typically will go out on site for projects before when a project is being considered, meet with the applicant to also help give them better direction on how, like what steps to take for their project. So for instance, in this case, anything that is visible that is orange shaded would be something where we would review with the historic district design guidelines. So for instance, if a property owner, like the window example is probably one of the easiest ones because it's a common project. So if someone came in with window requests, like anywhere that it's orange, we would say, it would have to be a compatible material that's not vinyl. But if you want to do vinyl on the back of the residence or wherever it's not shaded orange, then we're not going to review that against the standards. So
I have a question for you. Are there any instances in any Glendale districts where there's a contributing resource that for whatever reason, whether it's the character of its lot or it has a long driveway or whatever, that it has no public right-of-way visibility?
There are some flag lots in historic districts. We do have a specific code for that on the survey forms. It's a 7R code. And then there are also Glendale Register properties that are not visible whatsoever, but we take that as a case-by-case basis. And
So would the district design guidelines apply? Like, even if it's a contributor, would these guidelines then not apply because it's not visible from the public right-of-way?
So if it's not visible, most likely the consultant team was not able to make a determination whether it's a contributor or not. That's
Okay.
why the 7R code exists. It's
Right.
a very helpful code
Needs
to
to
say
be
like,
reevaluated,
yes,
yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And the thing in our code, not just historic code, but in all design review, landscaping does not hide visibility.
Okay.
So we pretend if there's a giant hedge in front of a property, we don't see it when we think what's visible from the street.
You don't see the hedge?
Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner
have-
Bartanian?
That was
Super-
actually one of my follow-up questions, because if you look at that garage, if there's landscaping there, you would not see that point. But also, what if there are no properties on the side in this example? Let's say there's a lawn next to the property, you could see through the garage, does that count as what's visible? Like you have it orange shaded, but the white part, does that count?
We rewrote the code a few years ago to say visibility is defined as the furthest extents along the sidewalk street frontage or the street frontage looking toward the property. This drawing used to have the little eyeball was at more of an angle to accommodate what you were talking about. Over the years, we've discussed what if you can see over the wall of a corner property and see the back of the house next door? And we were just opening a giant can of worms when we were thinking about that. We were thinking, oh, well, that makes sense if other people are held to that, but most houses and districts, their rear facade isn't visible. Corner lots suffer a little more. They've got two very visible facades. And sometimes you can see the back of a house from the sidewalk, especially on corner lots. So we're careful, but we want to have the code be very clear. When I worked in New York, the code was if you could see more than 1 foot of something, like a rooftop addition, if you could see more than 1 linear foot of that rooftop addition, we had to review it, but if it was just a little sliver that you saw at the top, we didn't. So cities do it different ways. That was kind of absurd in many situations with tall buildings.
How about, so just to clarify on this, we're looking at one viewing angle, or is it the opposite side of that building as well?
Opposite side,
It's two eyeballs,
Two
two
viewing
corners.
angles, got it. Good.
A corner lot gets more of a sweep of view. Hillside lots become a little bit different, but we don't, for Glendale Register, we look at everything, but for a district in the hillside, if you can see the back of the house from the street down the hill, we don't count that.
And there's a perspective aspect to it too. So for instance, if you see clearly there's a window there, but based on your perspective, you probably don't see an actual full window. So that's why site visits for staff are very helpful in assessing the visibility of certain projects.
Yeah, what Ani means is on a long side facade, even though we can see that side facade, as perspective changes, a window opening that you can clearly see that's near the front of the house starts compressing so that you can't really see what's in what you know is a window opening. We try to err on the side of helping people as much as we can. There will be people who tell us that I'm making that up, But we really do think about stuff like that, and we try to be realistic in terms of what is visible and what's meaningful and stuff like this. So.
So some of the major building elements that it covers in the district design guidelines, which is really helpful because all of the pages are labeled as that, is we will cover siding and exterior finishes, windows and doors, porches, roofs, which includes the roof form and the material, any architectural details, and massings and additions as well. So the architectural style specific guide, there's a lot going on, so this is just a visual. We're not going to go through everything that is written here. But for instance, in the center one, you can see the Spanish colonial revival style. It's going to give you a little bit of an introduction of that style itself. It's going to call out some of the character defining features on if you had no idea about architecture and design. And if you were to use this as a guide, it should help you understand a little bit about that architectural style. And then it would go into some of those character defining features that's introduced on the first page, which includes the windows and doors, roofs, porches, balconies, siding, addition, and gives you specific details about that. So for instance, with windows and doors on Spanish homes, we often see arched openings, which is a character defining style. So an arched opening is something we would want to preserve and retain because that's one of the characters of the residence. The massing of a Spanish style, it can be one story, but if it's two-story, typically there's a lot of articulation, there's towers. Those are things that the guidelines will call out. Now, we talked about windows. I think it's obvious by now you can change your windows, but there are specific guidance to this. Basically, the ultimate goal for this is if you have a house style that has a specific type of window, if it's a casement window or if it's a double hung window, like a slider window would generally not be appropriate for that style of house where it's visible. Slider windows came in a little bit after in the 1960s. So you're not gonna typically find that on a 1910 house. And by putting a slider window, you're removing a lot of that character. So even though the material change is approved, we just wanna make sure that the style kind of matches. Within Glendale, we also have special windows, but whether it's a historic district or a historic property or not, a lot of those special windows are still taken into special consideration when being looked at. So like stained glass windows that are original to the house, not ones that were probably done in the 80s or something, or leaded glass windows, anything that has some sort of detail. Those are things that we would review anyway. And same with doors, a lot of the doors are kind of a very important part of the soul of a house. So we take a look at that too. Make sure that the features kind of match. If you have an arched doorway, you wouldn't want to put a square door there and then close off some of that arch.
I have a question. Is there design guidance in here for garage doors? Where do you fall on that? Because garage doors are very visible a lot of the time, but obviously a lot of times the old wood ones are
Right.
old. Where do you typically fall on that in a district?
And that's a great point because oftentimes garage doors have been one of those features that have changed more often than any of the other ones, especially it being an accessory structure. Most of the time, if you're driving by, you might find the aluminum, roll-up doors. In a situation like that, we would again want to use the design guidelines in terms of just choosing a door that would be appropriate in style to the architectural style of the house. So, for instance, maybe carriage-style doors may not work on all architectural styles, but if someone is proposing that on something that it's compatible with, we can review and approve. So.
Okay.
You've hit one of the issues that. A weakness of the current guidelines that needs to be updated. Driveways, walkways, hardscape, garages, garage doors aren't really covered very well at all, if at all, in the guidelines. But through code, we have the ability to use our professional judgment. So if someone wants to replace what appears to be an original door in a district, we'll look at it and say, is it deteriorated, is it broken, is it beyond repair? Then we know what the style of the door was, and we'll ask them to try to replicate that. A lot of people want to have a roll-up door instead of a hinged lift-up door. That can usually be done in a way that when the door is closed, it's going to look like the old door, but when it opens, obviously it's different. If we're replacing a later replacement that itself is being replaced, we just use our judgment for the style of the house. Craftsman doors look different than Spanish doors. We err on the side of simplicity usually. So.
And if it's a weakness in the design guidelines for districts, at least we could still defer back to the Secretary of the Interior standards in cases like that for the
Well,
rehabilitation.
for whatever that's worth, in terms of how broadly drawn it is. The Secretary of Standards aren't going to tell us what kind of door to put in.
Right, but I mean, there's basic guidance here that we're following, and if somebody wants to put in a garage door that's clearly not going to be compatible with the design or detract from it, we could refer to the standards to find language to.
Sure, but if
argue that.
we're replacing a later replacement, we are risking creating a false sense of history.
Right, and I'm not talking about later replacement.
That's
I mean.
often, we rarely see original garage doors these days. so.
Right. But that does bring up a good point. I don't want to belabor this, but I mean, at what point are we dealing with a false sense of history? Because I mean, based off like the character defining features listed in a lot of these design guidelines or in, books like McAllister or whatever, we have a pretty good sense of what kind of features were likely there for a given design.
Yeah, and that's what we do, and that's why Ani mentioned carriage doors. Many people want to have doors with fake hinge straps
Yeah.
and things like that. Very few houses in Glendale were built with carriage-style doors. Most buildings were built after the automobile was around and had regular garage doors. So we often have people strip away some of the tchotchkes that they want to put on because
Right.
we don't know and it doesn't seem right, so.
Okay.
And then that becomes one of those things where like cute is not always historic.
Right.
We should
right.
have a criterion Q for cute is what I always say.
We used to use that all the time at ICF, cute but not historic, so.
Yeah. So moving forward to, we're almost done, I swear. It's the last few slides. Can people add to their house? Yes, absolutely, you can. These are some examples. So the top property, they wanted to do a 2-story addition. It was going to be in the back. It's a 2-story house. It's not visible. This one came to HPC because of the size and some of the proposals, but it's an addition in the back. It's not visible. Overall, it's compatible. Yes, it can work. And
In that case, it was somewhat visible, which is why we brought it. This is the one Commissioner Durham just mentioned with the enclosure of the balcony, and that's where we
Yeah.
kind of drew the line. We were cool with the 1,200 square foot addition at the back, and we focused our attention on the front facade, which is what district guidelines
Yeah.
direct us to do.
And it's not visible here because it's a current image, but just to give you an idea of options. So.
That's a good question.
Question?
Yeah, so actually to go back to the garage door issue. So let's say there's a house and it's one of the feature houses in a district, but it has a modern garage door. And then they need to replace that garage door. Do you ask them to replace it with something more in character with the time period?
We would basically work with the property owner to make sure that it overall fits in with the style of the home. There's a lot of options that can meet both the property owner's needs and also in terms of design be compatible with the architectural style of the house.
So going back to the style in that case is not creating a false sense of history.
So the false sense of history when it comes to garage doors, because a lot of the times they were also accessory structures, they were very simple versions of, they wouldn't have a lot of elaborations. Maybe some other districts or neighborhoods would, but in Glendale, they would be very simple elaborations. So we would encourage a property owner to do something that is a very minimal, modest, simple version of a typical garage door that looks old. So we don't, it's not a matter of just looking of its time, but it's just something that is modest and fits in with the overall style.
When I mentioned false sense of history with Daniel just now, Chair Paul. We are very informal here, so I encourage you to use our first names, and we will often defer to your first names unless you tell us you don't like it. But anyways, the idea of false sense of history is really if someone had a Spanish house and they wanted to put a door that you would never see on that style. That's really where that would get false. Obviously, we're making it up if we don't know what was there. So we put something that's kind of the period, typical. Often it's just going to be horizontal, tongue and groove siding, maybe some trim around the edges, maybe a vertical board in the center, something like that. But if we see a modern door when we're driving down the street in a historic district, we just say, oops, someone put a modern door in. So we don't do anything until they come to us and say, oh, I want to change my modern door. And the idea of districts, and this is something that we should emphasize at the beginning of this, the idea of district in general, everywhere in the world that has districts, is you are incrementally, slowly, over time, bringing things back closer to the way they used to be, but we're still letting things change. So we're not going to let someone put in a glass and metal door on a Spanish house. So.
And then another example here, oh, sorry, Chair, did you have a question? Oh, no, okay. So the second example here, we have a one-story house on the bottom. A two-story addition was recently approved, and that's when the commission worked with them to kind of, massage the proposal in a way that it would still work for their needs. They would get what they would need from this addition and what their requirements, like what their request was, but still makes sense for the overall scale, compatibility, and massing of the residence. So two-story additions can be possible. It's just it takes some perspective and look at it to make sure that the overall integrity of the house is preserved. So it was one of those things, and the reason why there's two perspectives shown here is because that addition is it's a corner lot, so that addition is gonna be visible from not just the front of the residence, but also the side setback as well. So it's just something to keep in mind that when projects come to the commission, oftentimes there may even be things that the property owner has not thought about, or the designer, that it ends up becoming something that makes the project better for not just their needs, but also for in terms of the design visible from the street. There is also a flip side to some of these additions, which, for instance, with a residence like this, the second story was added was a new addition on the primary residence. It was a one-story house, but the way that the addition was proposed and built is a little bit like it's right on the ridge line. It's not set back as what we would expect for an addition of this massing to be. So the ridge line kind of disappears. It's a little bit more overpowering than what you would expect. So in a situation like this, it should be as set back as possible. And these are things that are considered when projects come to the commission.
This is a good one for you to focus on. This was presented to us and considered while this historic district was under consideration, so it wasn't designated yet, and the survey had not occurred yet. We knew that the one-story house was a contributor to the district. It was pretty obvious that we're allowed to make that determination, even if we don't have a survey yet. So we brought this to the commission with the idea, like, we're not sure. This design is not bad. It's okay. We hope that the consultant will still look at this as a contributor at the end of the process, but we're not positive. HPC took that into consideration, said, we hope so too. Let's go forward with this. I think there was a little tentativeness because the district hadn't been surveyed yet. When the survey came out, this formerly obvious contributor became a non-contributor. So we've learned a lot at staff level from this in terms of how we're going to recommend things to you. For example, that other two-story house that had 1,200 square foot, two-story addition, no brainer for us. This lower house, the one is really hard to put a second story on a one-story house. We get calls all the time from realtors or potential buyers, hey, I'm thinking of buying this house. but it's not big enough for my family and we need to put a second floor on it. And I'm like, that's not an easy thing to do. So unless you're prepared for the city to say no at some point and you have a plan B or another property you're interested in, think about that. We'll never tell someone not to buy a property, but we'll let them know what the realistic sequence of thinking is going to be. In the lower case, the original proposal was much bigger than what HPC ultimately approved. And this is one of my favorite design review hearings ever, because it made me kick myself that HPC at the dais came up with this idea. I know we're making this smaller, but why don't you build out a little more on the first floor and get some more square footage in your family living space? And the owners were like, yeah, that's great. And I was like, oh, I wish I'd thought of that before we got to HPC. But that's the great, interactive kind of design review process where we're all going to have ideas and ultimately we're going to see which ones make the most sense to you, and hopefully the property owners agree. So.
Thank you. Once a historic district is designated and you're a contributor in that district, I assume it would never be allowed for a contributor to have designs approved that would turn it into a non-contributor? Or is that possible?
It is possible. But it would ultimately end up happening through an appeal process. So staff is not allowed to recommend something or approve something at staff level that would make a contributor a non-contributor. HPC is not supposed to do that, but there is, reasonable room for debate about whether something would be like the other one we just looked at, would it be a contributor or non-contributor? It's a little hard to say. Sometimes it's obvious, like a large addition at the front of a house is going to be harder to approve than something that we sort of see poking up over the back. The weird thing is, all of the projects that you'll be reviewing are going to have an environmental determination. We look at everything through the eyes of the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, and this is where I have problems with the state and the status codes that we have. Technically, in a historic district, individual properties are not historic necessarily. They may be, but individually they're not. What they have is their contribution to the overall designation of the district as being historic. But in the status codes that the state gives us, a 5 code means it is historic under CEQA. A 5, and this is the wonky part of our world, but a district contributor is a 5D, meaning historic, D for district, 5D1 once the district is designated. I have trouble with that because you can be a contributor and have all of your windows replaced. You can have all of these qualities that we would never accept for a Glendale Register property. Yet the 5 means that we have to look at it as a individually historic resource. So the reason Ani told you that for the non-contributors we have a code 7DNC, 7 means we're not sure, we haven't evaluated to see if this is a potential Glendale Register property, but it's definitely a district non-contributor, DNC. That's a code only Glendale uses. We approached the State Historic Preservation Office with this idea. We wanted to have a 7DC and a 7DNC. They were cool with 7DNC, but they never could get their head around the 7DC, 7 district contributor. Because the way I wrote that would be a 7DC means that the historic district design guidelines apply, but individual eligibility hasn't been established. I'm going to try to do that again just to see. It's pushing an envelope that many preservationists don't agree with and don't want to see, but it makes our lives a little harder. So to Alan's question, if you were to approve a contributor that turns into a non-contributor, does that mean that we would have to do an environmental impact report or a mitigated neg deck? We might have to do a mitigated negative declaration. You guys who don't know the CEQA stuff, you'll hopefully get osmosis or ask us later. But because the idea is our threshold goal is to not allow a district to get below the 60% threshold. So in a big district like Ross Moines, losing one contributor is losing like point something % of the district. In a small district like Cottage Grove, losing one contributor actually has a much bigger impact. And the goal of the city is not to lose contributors. We don't want to lose contributors. So that's why we don't want staff or the commission to be letting something become a non-contributor if we strongly believe that it would be. Sometimes you're the ultimate arbiter of that. If you saw, because we're not going to have that survey team come back who did a survey 10 years ago and tell us, what do you think? So you're the ultimate arbiter when a district is designated, whether you're comfortable still calling a property a contributor or not. So that's something we'll write into the staff report when we get an application like this and kind of leave it as an open-ended question. We'll probably have a recommendation, but we'll definitely draw your attention to the perils and potentials of that kind of decision-making. And that's one of the hardest things for us. Regulating districts, telling people what to do sometimes isn't easy ever, and it's not always a fun or comfortable thing, but we do it. It's what the city wants us to be doing, and ultimately, I think you as a commission will ultimately be helping us make those assessments.
Commissioner
But we'll
Barton.
also look into the CEQA ramifications too. So.
One of the questions I had about the survey, can you challenge the survey, like that contributor, for example, that became a non-contributor after they added the addition on top? Can you challenge
After
the
the survey's
surveyor?
been approved?
No, after the survey itself?
Yeah,
can you-
when we do the survey, the consultant prepares a draft survey, which includes draft versions of each individual DPR form for each property. We send out notice to all the owners. We put a link up on our website. They can go look at their actual property. And every survey makes some mistakes. Sometimes they're small mistakes. The stucco is rough when it's really smooth. There's this or that. We're dealing with a survey now that may not be the best survey that we've ever commissioned by the city. Ani and I have gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, and we disagreed on a number of determinations both ways, contributor to non-contributor or vice versa. And when we bring this back to the community and to HPC, you'll be looking at the version that we've vetted, that we're comfortable with. But you, as a body, may say, oh, we look at this, are you sure? Or you find an inconsistency. So nothing's written in stone until you approve the draft, and then we bring that to council.
And just so I'm clear, the draft versions do come in front of us.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, that's right. And then I had another question. Is there a, going back to something that was discussed a little while ago, is there a, at what point is there a stay on potential changes to houses in a district being taken under consideration in the permitting process relative to when something may or may not become a district? Is there a stay early on? Going back to that one example where this one, now is there some sort of stay early in the process?
It's not what we would call a stay. When HPC first considers a district, I don't know if you want to go back to well, no, don't worry about it. It's basically the first HPC hearing. You're looking at the application and you're saying, hey, does this look like we have enough information that tells us this is a quite possible potential district? So when a district is nominated and we have an application, we think of that as a potential historic district. After HPC says, yes, we think it's valid, let's move forward with the survey, we call it a pending historic district. And at that point, the district guidelines apply and HPC replaces DRB as the design review authority.
Got it.
So, which is not without controversy in the community. And the good thing about the streamlined process is we're hoping what realistically has taken 3, 4, 5 years more, I think, with Bellhurst at this point, to become a district is going to be a compressed timeline. So it'll be a little more fair, I think, for the property owners to kind of know you're going to have a determination within a reasonable
I actually
period.
remember, just for what it's worth, I remember some of those people at some of those longer meetings, I don't remember if it was for Verdugo Woodlands or not, saying that actually going through HPC is a lot of times quicker than going through design review board already.
It can be. We usually can get things to you faster than DRB.
Interesting, okay.
The next question that is often asked in historic districts is, can I build a new house? And there is new construction in historic districts on infill and development. So for instance, with this example that we have over here, one of the properties had a double lot frontage, which was subdivided, and eventually a new residence was constructed. It's a really nice looking house. The overall design, the massing and the articulation, it's an architectural style that would typically be found in a historic district like this. So it's being looked at as, does it feel compatible to the neighborhood? Does it feel like it belongs to the neighborhood? So new construction is possible within historic districts. It doesn't mean that it's not at all. And it has to, again, it's not about freezing a neighborhood in time, but just managing change so that when a property owner buys a house, they oftentimes buy that house because they love their neighborhood. And they want to not just live there, but they want their kids to have safe, healthy relationships with the neighbors, a safe neighborhood to play in and grow up in. And so historic districts, in a sense, kind of ensure that in a way, too, that the neighborhood you're buying your property in is going to be the neighborhood that you get to live in and enjoy for hopefully a good significant amount of your life.
I think, do we have any more slides?
We don't. I was
Just
trying
to-
to end it on a romantic
No,
note.
which was beautiful, beautiful. But I'm going to end it on an even more optimistic note, maybe not as beautiful. But Ani's mentioning this house, which was built on a lot that just happened to be open. It happened to never be developed in 90 years. Weird. We don't have much of that in our historic districts, but we do have lots of non-contributors in the districts. You can tear down a non-contributor and build new without any further environmental review. That's where we've seen some more new construction in the districts. And the optimistic part of this is we're not showing you the houses that were built after non-contributors were torn down because they're not the best examples of what could be, but they did pass muster with the HPC at the time. So here's my optimistic little thing to keep Ani's spirit alive. You guys can do better. We will get good new design when we have these things coming forward. And one of the issues with HPC is we historically don't have architects on this board. We should. It's not in our code to mandate that. You guys are going to do great anyways because you know the city, you know what you like, you know what's historic. So I'm not worried about it, but that's where we'll be seeing new construction when we do see it. So.
One more question. As I looked at the initial list of districts, other than Cottage Grove, all of them seem to be on the north side of Glendale,
Right.
But there are a lot of historic properties and historic areas in the southern part of Glendale. What do you think that is that no one's really applying for signage districts on the south side of Glendale?
When we do our surveys, so we did a South Glendale survey, the survey teams identify potential historic districts. The people who live in those areas are notified that their area has been identified. We just wait until we hear from people, ultimately. We don't go out banging on doors and actively advocating for districts. So I can't answer that question exactly. South Glendale historically always had multifamily zoning and single-family zoning everywhere.
Right.
And that's why we don't have a great Craftsman historic district like you have in LA or Pasadena. Some of the districts that were identified in the South Glendale survey, when I look at them, I'm like, yeah, maybe, but they're not the, yeah, that's a district kind of thing. So I'm not even sure that if those came forward with nominations, that how far they would make it, but they might. We're now doing the East and West Glendale survey, and soon we'll do the North Glendale survey. and we'll be seeing districts being identified also. But
The next update.
yeah, oh, great, yeah. Because there's one district, there's a street called El Miradero, right below Brand Park. Every house is Spanish. You look at an aerial, red, 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 everywhere. When I started here, I've been here almost 18 years now, there's someone who lives on that street in that neighborhood who has all the materials ready, all the research done to nominate a historic district. For whatever reason, and I've nagged at him, I nagged at one of his neighbors back in the day when I was newer and maybe felt nagging was more appropriate. And it's just never come forward, so I don't know why, but,
Well,
Yeah,
we
just
should,
curious. It
Yeah,
stood
no.
out to me, obviously, looking at the map and.
yeah.
Would something, how would, if there's new construction, like a non-contributor is demolished in a historic district, would you like apply standard, like, is there any, what is the general, I guess you went over it a little bit here, but presumably whatever new construction there is, would standard 9 apply, like compatible but differentiated? or-
No, again, we have district design guidelines that generally we focus on rather than the standards for historic districts.
Okay.
But there's a chapter in the design guidelines for infill,
Okay,
and that's the section that applies, that covers the basic
okay.
guidance from the standards.
There is some guide, so there, in a nutshell, there is definitely some guidance to make.
That's toward the end, I can't remember what page it is, but it's
Okay.
in there.
Okay,
Several
good.
pages, not huge.
Good, all right. Go ahead.
I had a question about, it's really not ethics, but is it permitted, for instance, say there is a property that I see in the city, and I'm thinking of one that recently sold, and of course, Mills Act contracts are much more valuable to people who buy at current prices because
Right.
of the property tax is higher. As a commission member, am I allowed to approach them and just tell them, because they may not be aware, you might want to consider applying, to be a historic resource and get a Mills Act contract? Or is that something I should not do as?
You would not be the first commissioner to do that. We don't have an ethical rule about that. My only concern is not knowing everyone's, recognition of what has qualified in the past and what's kind of the right place, is that you might give someone a reasonable expectation that something is eligible that might turn out not to be. I've never had the question, I don't think we've even asked the city attorney, I don't think you would have any conflict by just saying that in passing. It's no different than being a member of the Historical Society and telling someone, you have a beautiful house, you should nominate it. You're not, if any of you were to do that, I would make sure that you issued every caveat that you could, like, I'm not promising anything, I don't know the details of the history of your property. And then if you remember, if time is shorter, and if you remember that you did have that contact with the owner, you should probably disclose it at the hearing and say that you don't believe that it biases you in any way. But in general, commissioners, you have to be very aware of not appearing biased for any of our projects, even a Glendale Register nomination, which sometimes some of the houses are just obvious, yay, rah, rah, and that's why this is the Happy Commission. We're looking at beautiful places and we're making people happy by designating them. But we really have to stay focused on, does it meet the criteria? Does it meet the threshold? Whatever we're looking at, we have to make sure we're doing it with a sound legal basis. So keep that forefront, not in the back of your head, in the front of your head. And, yeah, so maybe we'll ask someone about that but I know for sure over the years, many commissioners have talked to people like that, so.
Thank you both for this. This has been a great primer. It's creating a baseline for us. I think it'll be very helpful moving forward. I have a couple of questions and comments. Is it, with criteria F, is it possible that, and I'm not talking about historic districts at the moment, but is it possible for the contributing, the defining feature for a property to be landscape and not architectural?
Well, we have a park that's designated. We had a tree that was designated. You're talking about Glendale Register?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't have many rules about what can't be designated. So landscape features could be, but I doubt that we would designate an individual property solely for its landscape. We had a house on Lawson Place, that beautiful Spanish house, a really significant religious figure lived there, who was the longest served, I think, Methodist leader in the nation, not just in Glendale or LA or wherever. He owned a double lot and planted an orchard on the south side of the house, and during the Depression, used the fruits and whatever else he was growing there to help support the community. So that part of the lot was called out in the designation as an important component of the history of the site. Not that we're going to regulate every orange tree or whatever was planted there necessarily, but we do try to identify significant landscape features that go beyond the protected trees, the oaks, sycamores, and bays. So we've had one house where we identified a deodar cedar, huge, that was in front of the house. We have several houses where we identify other landscape features, but it's not common.
Okay.
But I don't know if you had a specific idea of landscapes in lieu of a built
It's just a thought.
Yeah.
Just curious about that. And then also with, and I know this is going to sound silly, but with criteria B, with the.
I'll be honest, I don't have the district criteria memorized.
Yeah,
We don't really use them.
This is, a person associated with,
Okay.
with the property.
Okay, yeah.
And I.
Criterion 2 is where we go.
Pardon?
We use 2, we have a numbered system.
Oh.
It's weird, we can get into that some other time.
So instead of a person, could it be an animal?
Mr. Ed, yes.
Well, exactly. I mean, one of the Lassies or, Rin Tin Tin,
It's an amazing question. I like it. I don't know. I had a student who wrote his thesis on the potential for designation of sites that were used as background settings in movies, especially silent era movies. And I was like, this is cool. This is a great thing to be rethinking about and pursuing, but I didn't get my head convinced that alone would make something significant. Though it could be, a lot of times we tell people, that kind of secondary background information is interesting and we want to keep it in the record so that it's part of the files that we keep and into the staff reports that we write. So in general, someone in the future will be able to find that. But I don't know. Yeah, that's interesting.
I would guess that it would be pretty easy, like if there was an incident regarding an animal, if it was like an animal associated with entertainment, like Lassie or Mr. Ed or something like that, then that could be folded under the broad patterns and social significance criterion for associations with the entertainment industry. So it probably wouldn't go under B for person as some sort of different life form, but it seems like it would easily, if it was a significant site associated with Lassie or some other entertainment animal, it seems like maybe an argument could be made under associations with early era entertainment industry. If that's
Although I would probably push back on that a little, because you also have to have the association, the site that's being considered for designation, have some primary association with what made that animal or person
right,
important.
and that's my assumption
Unlikely
too.
that Lassie's house was what made.
Of course,
so,
but let's say there was a primary association with Lassie somehow, in some
If everyone's gone to sleep out there.
in some alternate universe, maybe it's Lassie's Doghouse that made it in every episode. Who knows? But if that was even conceivable or even possible, then it would probably fall under A, not B. I think B, I think typically deals with human beings.
To say person, yeah.
Not just not all life
No, but
forms.
I think it's a great question, all joking aside.
Yeah.
And the thing that preservation as a field, as a movement has done over the years is broadened what we consider potentially important to people. And if we found a site that did have this association and maybe had that little extra thing where the site itself had a direct connection with that significance, sure, yeah, why not?
Oh, just one quick question, something for either GR or the districts, is there a 50-year rule?
No,
There's not.
there's a 0-year rule in Glendale.
Okay.
So I have one more thought, one more question. With the historic districts, they're bound by very clear lines. And I just wondered about, and again, this is kind of a what-if question, with non-contiguous properties, is that something that could potentially happen, or?
Yeah, there's two things. There's non-contiguous districts, like Van Nuys in Los Angeles is two separate areas separated by Van Nuys Boulevard, which isn't part of the district. We don't have a provision prohibiting that, so that would be a possibility. But the idea of like the National Park Service with the multiple property nomination process, I don't think we would have a district in Glendale, the way our code's currently written, that would allow, every stone house in Glendale to be considered part of a district. Right now, each of those stone houses would have to be individually designated. But it doesn't mean that as a field, we don't have tools to kind of go there, but we don't have that right now.
Okay, good to know.
And we've got a curious thing happening now with the Verdugo Woodlands nomination. Nia Gerard Drive, an existing historic district, is in the middle of the proposed Verdugo Woodlands district. Does Nia Gerard Drive go away as a district? Does it get subsumed into Verdugo Woodlands, or do we have it being a little weird squiggly donut hole in the middle of the larger district around that? We don't know yet, so. A lot of this would be just working things out with a close reading of the code, talking to the city attorney, and if it was something we needed to make a code change for, maybe that would happen.
Commissioner Rotini?
One last question for me, I swear. If you take our city and compare it to other similar cities,
It's the best.
yeah, as far as districts, how do we compare? Is it do we rank high as the most amount of districts in a kind of a similar size city? Is it the least amount? Is it medium?
We're for a city this size, we have a robust district program. I don't know the details. New York has I think they have over 100 districts now. Los Angeles has, I don't know, 50 or 60 districts.
Los Angeles has 50 or 60 districts, but some of them are gigantic. They're
Yeah, Highland
historic
Park is
preservation
huge.
overlay zones, and I think there's 20,000 HPOZ contributors combined.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I think we're doing okay. The thing we don't have that I'm jealous of Pasadena, which has some very lovely historic districts in LA. A lot of times, most of our districts, in fact, have a pretty wide period of significance talking about the development of that area over time, where some cities have neighborhoods that were all built within 5 years. And so you have a lot of consistency, and the streetscapes in those neighborhoods are different than what we have, which doesn't mean ours are lesser, but I wish we had some of those kinds of districts too. But right now, I think our districts are really interesting, and they're comparable to places I've seen driving around the country. I always try to poke into districts when I'm traveling. And yeah, some are better, some are less. So.
Okay, right. Go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly point out that a decision about a historic district by this commission is a recommendation to city council,
Yes.
correct? And because it's an overlay zone, you need approval of 4 of the 5 council members for it
Yes.
to get designated.
Unless there's an opposition petition.
Any other questions? Okay, all
But we
right.
have more slides.
You have more slides? Really?
But wait, there's more. I'm kidding. No, I'm
Serious?
kidding. No.
Oh.
Normally, when I see that, it's my cue to be done. Okay, so we're wrapping up agenda item 8B. Thank you so much, both of you. This was really fantastic, really informative, things that I haven't thought about in a long time, really, just great information. So thank you so much. Now, let's move on to item 9A, Community Development Department updates. Update regarding community outreach for East, West, and North Glendale surveys and context.
Which I forgot we even had until Ani just showed me that. Very brief. Part of our mission in doing surveys is try to hear from people about places that we might not know about if we're just looking at everything on the street. So we have recently done 2 outreach events at Fire Day. Ani was there, and Earth Day, I was there. We've created a survey form for people who just want to come chat with us.
Is there a wind day? Because you have earth and fire.
Yeah, we
It's a
talked about
70s
that being in September.
Yeah.
Yeah.
70s joke, earth, wind, and fire, get it?
Did you get my joke? That's coming in September.
Oh.
It'll be on the
what day?
21st of September. 21st.
21st, yeah.
Good, okay.
So we put together a little form. We try to make it super user-friendly. We got many people who said the Americana was an important place for them, which is not unexpected. Several children were like, I like their library, whatever library they use. That was so sweet. So I was really happy to see that. We didn't learn about too many places that we haven't discovered yet or weren't familiar with. The goal is to, buildings are mute until, if it's a pretty historic building, great, it tells us something, but it doesn't tell us who lived there. It doesn't tell us what happened there. It doesn't tell it how it contributed to history in any way. So we're hopeful. We're going to continue doing outreach. We have a new outreach person who works for the Community Development Department, who I just ran into today, he wants to tag along with the survey team to just get maybe some pictures. I don't know what he's going to use. We're going to put stuff up on the website. We're going to have at least one, probably 2 community meetings where we do outreach to all of the parties who we think represent different groups of people in the city. The net's going to be wide. We're going to go for social groups, religious groups, neighborhood groups, homeowners associations, the Chamber of Commerce, realtors, and we're going to send out notices that we're having this meeting. We'll hold it here, and we don't have a date set or anything. And the idea is to let them know, A, the surveys are happening, and to hear if they have anything to contribute. Council expects outreach for things like this. It's always good policy to try to get as many voices to tell us what's important to them. So that's what we have started doing and will be continuing through the course of the survey. So that's that.
I think we're at the end. Motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? Okay. Mr. Martini seconds me, and we are finished at 8:42 p.m. Thank you all so much.
Very nice.